The story opens with a small cyclops watching through a magical portal. Below the portal, a group of monster hunters is locked in battle with a massive purple dragon, its enormous wings spreading wide as it resists their assault. The hunters move in coordination as they press their attack. Among them is Baiza, an A-rank shaman affiliated with Golden Hour, supporting the team while advancing steadily. Beside him is Rodish, also A-rank, a mage from Golden Hour, continuously maintaining offensive magic. At the front stands Kyunin, an S-rank magic swordsman from Golden Hour, directing the flow of battle with calm precision. Moving along the dragon's flank is Saki, an S-class third-rank swordsman from the Sword of the Savior, waiting patiently for the right moment. Yuki, a rank F adventurer with no job or affiliation, remains far behind, overwhelmed by the scene unfolding before him. Baiza and Rodish unleash a combined attack that forces the dragon's attention forward. As the creature is distracted by Kyunin's relentless pressure, Saki seizes the opening. She leaps into the air and activates her sword skill, releasing a flurry of precise strikes from every direction. The assault overwhelms the dragon completely, tearing through its defenses and bringing it down in an instant. The hunters stand before the fallen dragon with confidence. From a distance, Yuki watches in stunned silence, reflecting on the sheer gap between himself and adventurers of such caliber. As he recalls the state of the world, the past weighs heavily on his mind. Decades have passed since disasters known as dungeons began appearing, and adventurers emerged to challenge them. Despite humanity's efforts, the number of dungeons continues to grow. Abandoned and undiscovered dungeons frequently spiral out of control, creating widespread danger. Many adventurers hunt monsters only for profit, leaving dungeons uncleared. Only a small number truly understand the threat and take responsibility for completing dungeon clears like this one. Pulled back into the present, Yuki hurriedly resumes his role, shaken by his own hesitation. He feels the sharp contrast between himself and the others. Moments later, their leader reminds him of his responsibility within the party, reinforcing the seriousness of the situation. As Yuki moves forward, carrying his pack, he reflects on his shortcomings. Earlier, he lacked the awareness expected of an adventurer. Witnessing the power of elite adventurers firsthand had excited him too much. While it should have been a valuable learning experience, the gap between them feels overwhelming. He has no job, no mana to speak of, and no real standing among them. Still, he resolves that one day, he will become an adventurer like them. His thoughts are interrupted by a quiet reminder to stay focused. Yuki acknowledges it and continues on, memories resurfacing as he walks. 2 years ago, a dungeon outbreak caused the collapse of an entire district. Rescue efforts failed, casualties mounted, and survival became unlikely. Yuki and Saki, who grew up together in an orphanage, had once dreamed of becoming adventurers. When disaster struck, the dungeon outbreak destroyed their home and took everything from them. Returning fully to the present, Yuki clenches his fist, determined to prevent such tragedies from ever happening again. The Cyclops continues to observe him through the portal. Beside it, a white, long-haired beastman also watches silently, identifying Yuki as the final piece of their plan. Suddenly, Yuki senses something strange. Before he can react, a glowing red magical mandala appears beneath the party. Shock spreads instantly as the formation expands, covering the area around them. The magic activates, and in a flash, the entire group is transported elsewhere. In the unfamiliar space they arrive in, an unseen presence makes itself known, signaling the beginning of something far more dangerous. Everyone soon realizes that they have been forcibly teleported to somewhere completely different, far removed from the original dungeon area. The surroundings feel wrong, unstable, and hostile. Confusion spreads through the group as they assess their location. Kyunin immediately takes control, organizing a party and ordering everyone to stay alert while preparing an escape method. Saki draws her sword, sensing an approaching threat before it fully reveals itself. The ground beneath them suddenly begins to boil, transforming into molten lava. Heat floods the area as the environment itself turns lethal. At that moment, an old man with red eyes appears before them without warning. The pressure he exudes is overwhelming, and Saki instantly recognizes what he represents. The realization strikes the group with terror. This presence far exceeds a normal dungeon boss. The old man reacts calmly, almost amused, as the hunters move to attack without hesitation. Kyunin advances alongside Saki, launching a coordinated assault enhanced by magic. Despite the force behind their attack, the old man remains unmoved, criticizing their recklessness and lack of understanding. One by one, figures emerge beside him, his companions. The battle instantly shifts against the hunters. Kyunin is intercepted mid-attack and sent crashing back with severe injuries. Baiza is struck head-on by a powerful blow and hurled through the air. Rodish is flanked before she can react, overwhelmed by the sudden appearance of another enemy. It becomes clear that the hunters are completely outmatched. A magical formation appears, opening a portal, and from it steps a white-haired man whose presence eclipses even the others. The old man and his companions bow respectfully, confirming his identity as the true ruler of this space. Despair sets in among the hunters as they realize annihilation is imminent. That sense of hopelessness echoes inside Yuki's mind. The thought of being wiped out resurfaces, triggering memories he refuses to relive. He rejects the idea of tragedy repeating itself. Acting on instinct, Yuki pulls out an extraction tool. As he activates it, a golden mandala forms, initiating a return sequence. With resolve, he draws his sword and steps forward alone, deliberately closing the distance between himself and the Demon King. This reckless act shocks everyone. Rodish realizes that Yuki has moved beyond the return range. Saki understands his intention immediately, fear and grief washing over her as the countdown continues. Kyunin restrains her, forcing her to retreat as the teleportation activates. Yuki watches them disappear, accepting the outcome. Ensuring their survival was his goal. Before he can recover, one of the Demon King's companions strikes him repeatedly, dropping him to his knees. Despite the pain, Yuki remains conscious, meeting the Demon King's gaze without backing down. When questioned about his intent, Yuki reveals his resolve to find a way to defeat him someday. Before losing his chance, he throws the extraction tool toward Kyunin, entrusting the future to them. As the teleport completes, Saki vanishes in tears, screaming his name. Left behind with the Demon King and his subordinates, Yuki listens as the Demon King reflects on his choice. Yuki explains calmly that the others, being high-ranking adventurers, will eventually return and clear the dungeon. Their survival matters more than his own. Still, he feels regret for leaving Saki behind. The Demon King laughs, acknowledging the madness and nobility of Yuki's decision. Then, unexpectedly, he proposes a pact. Confused, Yuki listens as the Demon King explains the monster's perspective. Dungeon clears by humans constantly endanger their kind. To protect his subordinates, the Demon King seeks to strengthen the dungeon itself by acquiring mana from other dungeon bosses. The dragon that was defeated was part of that growing sacrifice. As the Demon King speaks of tragedy, Yuki realizes their pain mirrors his own. Questioning the morality of sacrificing other dungeons, Yuki weighs the cost. The Demon King states plainly that if it is for his people, such actions are unavoidable. Yuki recalls Saki, the orphanage, and everything already lost. For family, he is willing to risk everything. Yuki demands a promise. The humans will be sent back alive if the Demon King grows strong enough. The Demon King explains that if humans can no longer challenge them, they will stop entering the dungeon altogether. After considering the alternatives, Yuki accepts. Allowing the dungeon to run wild would only cause more deaths before anyone could stop it. He agrees to cooperate. Their hands clasp, not in trust, but in mutual resolve. Yuki makes it clear that his actions are for humanity alone. The Demon King accepts him as a collaborator, revealing the true nature of the role awaiting him. Only those without a job can walk this path. The surrounding monsters view him with interest, seeing him as a useful tool. Yuki remains calm, his resolve unwavering. Inwardly, he vows that he will not be controlled. Instead, he will be the one who masters the monsters. The Demon King glares at Yuki with a serious expression, making it clear that the monsters fully intend to take advantage of him. He then reveals that traveling to other dungeons is only possible if they are summoned by a Tamer collaborator. From there, he explains the conditions required to become a Tamer. The first condition is having no class at all. The second is forming a mandatory contract with a monster in order to obtain the new skill. He explains that there are 3 possible ways to form such a contract: defeating the monster in combat, understanding and connecting with it, or a third method, When Yuki shows curiosity about the final option, the Demon King calmly reveals that the last method is to force the contract. Dark energy immediately begins to flow into Yuki's body. The process causes intense pain, and he instinctively looks down at his hand, where a magic symbol starts forming. The sensation is overwhelming, far worse than he expected. Then, something unusual happens. He suddenly realizes that another presence is observing everything he sees. The Demon King's vision has merged with his own, allowing the Demon King to see through Yuki's eyes. In that moment, Yuki understands that any thought of betrayal has already been anticipated. The glowing symbol on his hand makes it clear that he cannot call for help and that everything from now on must be handled alone. Satisfied, the Demon King snaps his fingers, signaling that his preparations are complete. Yuki is warned that he will be sent back to the surface. Before he can prepare himself, the transfer begins. The Demon King's final instruction is simple. Enter any dungeon and summon him at the appropriate time. Before Yuki can fully process what that means, he is forcibly removed from the dungeon. He reappears at the dungeon entrance, where he sees his companions safe and unharmed. Saki stares at him in shock, tears filling her eyes. Yuki reassures her with a small smile and a simple gesture to show that he is fine. Unable to hold back any longer, she runs toward him and embraces him tightly, overcome with relief. Yuki gently comforts her, still shaken by everything that has happened. The other adventurers quietly watch the reunion from a distance. The following day, the scene shifts to a modern building belonging to the Adventurers Guild. Yuki approaches the information desk to register for a new mission. His request draws surprise, as solo dungeon clearing has become highly restricted. Recent years have seen many adventurers abandon dungeon clears in favor of hunting monsters purely for profit. Greed for easy rewards has led to a rise in dungeon outbreaks, turning them into a serious social problem. Because of this, the guild now enforces strict safety regulations. Adventurers must earn trust through contributions to raise their rank, starting from F and working upward toward S. Solo missions are generally prohibited, as those who attempt them are often desperate individuals seeking quick wealth. Yuki explains that he only intends to enter an F-rank dungeon to improve his standing. Understanding his situation, the receptionist processes his request and assigns him a beginner dungeon known as the Labyrinth of Silence. The dungeon contains few monsters and is considered suitable for low-ranked adventurers. A guide escorts Yuki to the entrance, where a guard unlocks the gate and allows him to proceed. Inside, Yuki notices an emergency button and reflects on how minimal the security seems for an abandoned dungeon. Suddenly, he feels a chill. A familiar presence makes itself known, and the Demon King's voice reaches him directly through his mind. Yuki realizes that this is a new skill, one that allows direct communication with monsters. While convenient, the sensation is unsettling. The Demon King explains that abandoned dungeons lack proper management. When a dungeon no longer provides valuable resources, adventurers stop maintaining it. Left alone, monsters reproduce freely until the dungeon can no longer sustain the imbalance. Eventually, this leads to collapse. As Yuki looks around, he notices how empty the dungeon feels. Even the Demon King seems unimpressed by the lack of activity. The silence lingers, almost unnatural. Then, without warning, the ground beneath Yuki begins to shake violently, breaking the stillness and signaling that something is about to happen. At the same time, a desperate scream echoes from nearby as another adventurer warns everyone to run. A group of adventurers immediately panics, realizing that the violent tremor is being caused by the dungeon boss. Yuki watches in shock as a gigantic slime emerges, attacking the fleeing adventurers without mercy. The Demon King quickly understands the situation. With no human interference, the monsters inside the dungeon were forced to devour one another to survive. Over time, a single slime consumed all the others, becoming the only survivor and growing abnormally large in the process. This explains why the dungeon felt completely empty. Now, that same creature turns its hungry and hostile gaze toward the adventurers. Yuki reacts instantly, signaling an escape route for the others. However, the slime moves faster than expected and captures two adventurers with its viscous body. Trapped inside the sticky mass, one of them struggles desperately, but is unable to move. She loses her footing and is dragged fully inside the slime's body. Yuki watches helplessly as she is completely submerged in the green substance, unable to breathe or call for help. Realizing how dire the situation is, Yuki asks the Demon King whether she can be saved. The response makes it clear that, under normal circumstances, it would be impossible. Time is running out, and the girl continues to suffocate inside the monster. Yuki understands that hesitation will only lead to her death. An idea suddenly forms in his mind. Without wasting another second, he charges straight toward the giant slime. Ignoring the danger, he dives headfirst into the creature's body. Observing this, the Demon King finds the situation amusing, noting that things have finally become interesting. Inside the slime, Yuki forces his way through the dense mass and reaches the unconscious girl. He holds her tightly, shielding her as best as he can. The mark on his hand begins to glow, and he realizes that the moment to summon the Demon King has arrived. Gathering everything he has, he activates the summon while holding the girl close. A violent surge of energy erupts. A summoning circle forms, covered in red symbols, and a massive presence manifests. The Demon King appears only partially, allowing himself to be used. The summoning succeeds, and a giant slime begins to dissolve from within. Once the monster collapses, Yuki is thrown out and crashes to the ground, coughing up a strange liquid. His body feels as though it is burning from the inside, overwhelmed by the power he invoked. The Demon King warns him not to break down yet, stating that even a fraction of his power is enough to end the fight. Together, they unleash a devastating attack. A sphere of condensed purple energy slams into the ground, causing a massive explosion that completely annihilates the slime. When the dust settles, only remnants float in the air. Yuki stares at the aftermath, realizing that the attack was not merely meant to defeat the enemy, but to demonstrate overwhelming force. The girl he saved watches in terror, while another adventurer looks on in disbelief. Noticing Yuki's severe injuries, they rush to carry him out of the dungeon. Confusion overtakes him as his strength fades. His vision blurs, his legs give out, and he collapses, losing consciousness. A few days later, the scene shifts to a vast red hall within the dungeon of the Infinite Abyss. Yuki examines his new E-rank license, realizing he advanced while unconscious in the hospital. He recalls how the adventurers, despite their fear, carried him to safety. The Demon King appears calmly, holding a glass of wine, and questions Yuki's gloomy expression. Yuki reflects on the fact that he had only managed to summon a small portion of the Demon King's power. The Demon King explains that what mattered was Yuki's decision not to abandon the life in front of him. He acknowledges Yuki's resolve and offers praise for recognizing another path when most would hesitate. Yuki accepts the gesture, but the Demon King warns him that constantly pushing himself to the brink is dangerous. Instead, he introduces another option. An undead maid named Elvina appears, formally presenting herself as Yuki's servant. Yuki observes that she seems calm and approachable, though her playful remarks quickly catch him off guard. The Demon King assures him that she is more than capable, even stronger than Yuki himself. Elvina expresses her desire to be an easy companion to work with. The plan is simple. Yuki must grow stronger before attempting another summoning of the Demon King. To demonstrate her strength, Elvina effortlessly defeats powerful fire monsters with a single punch. Yuki is left stunned by the display. The dungeon they are in is an E-rank training area, yet her power far exceeds what he expected. As they continue, Yuki is reminded of his days at the orphanage, recalling a child who used to boast in a similar way. The nostalgia is brief, interrupted by a sudden surge of growth as level-ups continue without stopping. Elvina explains that, unlike the Demon King, she can remain summoned for long periods with minimal strain. The mana cost of summoning the Demon King was simply too great. Yuki realizes that summoning is not just about raw power, but efficiency. Reaching the boss room, he wonders how they will open the massive door. Without hesitation, Elvina steps forward and smashes it open with a single kick. Inside, a knight clad in flames rises to face them. The enemy immediately attacks, wielding a sword engulfed in an unusual fire. Yuki notices something strange about the flames and rushes forward instinctively, but Elvina blocks the strike with ease. She explains that the flames are sacred, a natural enemy to undead beings like herself. Despite that, she remains composed, even joking about her condition. Yuki realizes that the path ahead will not be simple, but with careful choices, strength, and resolve, he may be able to survive what awaits him. Faced with the situation, the knight in shining armor prepares a skill and activates a sanctuary formed by a fire circle, trapping everyone inside a ring of flames. Alina quickly realizes that the boss has no intention of letting them escape and compares his presence to the powerful lordly bear. Our MC briefly considers summoning the Demon King to escape, but the maid reminds him that with his current power, she is the only one he can summon. With no other option available, he accepts that they must handle the situation on their own. The servant finds his attitude somewhat harsh and questions whether a tamer truly intends to stand at the front while his monster fights. He calmly confirms his intent, treating them as equal partners rather than master and subordinate. The maid acknowledges this and accepts their partnership. She suggests that they stay close and takes a combat stance, preparing for the battle ahead. RMC also steadies himself, determined to demonstrate the results of his recent level-ups. The servant resolves to do whatever is necessary to secure victory. Together, they face the Fire Knight as the battle begins. RMC recalls that leveling up should have granted him a new ability. He activates it, causing his eye to glow as the demonic Eye of Truth takes effect. Through this skill, he learns that the dungeon boss uses sacred fire, an element particularly effective against dark attributes. Realizing the danger this poses to his servant, he urges her to act quickly. The knight immediately counters, but the warning signs provided by the skill allow both of them to evade the sacred flames. RMC pulls his servant away in time, ensuring she avoids injury. He explains that his new ability allows him to perceive enemy attributes, skills, and danger levels. His glowing eye reflects the power he awakened during the battle. Elvina recognizes this as one of the foundational abilities of monster tamers. Although the skill provides valuable insight, it does not reveal everything. Even so, the maid believes this advantage gives them a chance to win and rushes forward to continue the fight. With her master guiding her movements, she attacks confidently and lands a direct hit. However, the knight shows no sign of damage. RMC quickly realizes that her attacks are not reaching the true enemy. Using his ability again, he discovers that the armored knight is merely a shell. Inside the armor, a small fire monster controls the movements, narrowly dodging her strikes. With this understanding, they adjust their approach. As the Fire Knight prepares another attack, our MC issues precise instructions, guiding the servant's movements step by step. His glowing eye tracks the enemy's actions carefully. At the right moment, she strikes the knight's shoulder, then follows up with a kick to the helmet. This time, the armored figure stumbles, marking the first clear reaction to her attacks. Encouraged, our MC continues, pushing his ability further, knowing the plan is close to succeeding. Just as he prepares to give the next command, an explosion erupts. He shields Elvina from the blast and takes the impact himself. Despite being injured, he reassures her that he can continue fighting. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, the servant requests that he activate her special ability. Though unfamiliar with it at first, he quickly understands its nature. The skill temporarily boosts all of her attributes, but can only be used once and requires precise timing. Trusting his judgment, the maid places her faith in him, confident he will choose the right moment. Danger signs surround the knight from every direction. Following his guidance, the servant dodges continuously while maintaining pressure, then abruptly halts to mislead the enemy. The Fire Knight responds with a powerful strike. The explosion sends our MC crashing to the ground, leaving him badly injured. Even so, he forces himself to stand and continues directing the fight. At the decisive moment, he activates her skill. A surge of pink energy envelopes the servant as her power peaks. She delivers a single, overwhelming kick directly at the creature inside the armor. The impact creates a crater in the ground and completely shatters the knight's armor. With its protection destroyed, the dungeon boss is finally defeated and collapses, powerless. With the battle over, our MC collapses from exhaustion. Though they have won, the cost is clear. Elvina warns that the skill she used carries a heavy burden, and soon after, she disappears in a bright flash of pink light. Unable to move, our MC reaches out, only to realize that his summon no longer responds. He suddenly finds himself back in Libel's dungeon, where the Demon King greets him upon his return. When he asks about Elvina, Libel leads him to a serene place resembling a sacred garden. There, the maid lies motionless on a bed of flowers. Libel explains that this is how their kind mourns those who have fallen. Through this explanation, our MC learns the truth. Elvina was an undead maid, and her racial ability carried a fatal side effect. Using that power meant sacrificing her own life. Realizing this, he lowers his head in grief, understanding that she paid the ultimate price so they could win. Overcome with guilt, he believes the responsibility lies with him alone. Libel explains that her sacrifice was made to protect the dungeon from human threats and that she fulfilled her role perfectly. According to him, she simply performed her duty to its fullest extent. The Demon King states that the responsibility belongs to him, as he is the ruler of that place and of all its servants. However, our MC places the blame entirely on himself, believing that the outcome was the result of his own decisions. Overcome by guilt, he strikes the ground with force, feeling the weight of his failure settle heavily on his shoulders. He reflects on how he should have thought more carefully instead of simply following the servant's suggestion. The moment stirs memories of the past, reminding him of another time when he was unable to fight until the very end. Tears well in his eyes as he condemns himself once more for being too weak to protect her. In response, Libel resolves to make him strong enough to one day fully summon him. Desperate, our MC asks whether any Tamer skill exists that could revive Elvina. The answer is firm and cold. Tamers consume monsters, they do not restore them. Hearing this, he sinks into despair, believing that all hope has been lost. At that moment, a new maid appears, remarking that excessive harshness serves no purpose. Libel acknowledges her presence, and she observes that a conclusion has already been reached without including our MC. Recognizing her as one of the dungeon's executives, he activates the demonic Eye of Truth. His glowing eye analyzes her, revealing sacred magic and a resurrection ability bound by specific conditions. The discovery shocks him, as he realizes the true nature of her power. Hope resurfaces as the possibility of reviving Elvina becomes clear. However, the maid points out that understanding the skill's effect does not equate to understanding its requirements. Libel recognizes this limitation and instructs her to explain everything in detail. She formally introduces herself as Mai, the head maid of the dungeon, responsible for maintenance, backups, and resurrection protocols. Our MC focuses on the idea of resurrection as she explains her role. She recalls that humans regularly attempt to destroy dungeons, and her duty is to act as insurance in worst-case scenarios. By reviving fallen defenders, she ensures the dungeon's survival. While resurrection is possible, it comes with strict conditions. The first is the overwhelming amount of mana required. As an example, reviving human would demand mana equivalent to constructing an entire floor of the dungeon. Applying this logic to Elvina, he realizes the cost would dramatically reduce the dungeon itself. A smaller dungeon would become far easier for humans to conquer, which is why others strongly opposed using the resurrection skill. Understanding this, our MC considers the idea of slowly accumulating and used mana over time. However, that hope is quickly dismissed when he learns that Elvina's remaining mana will dissipate within 10 days. This means the required mana must be obtained elsewhere, and quickly. Mai proposes a solution, conquering another dungeon. Not just any dungeon, but one far larger than those they have dealt with so far. Our MC understands that clearing dungeons would allow them to seize the necessary mana for resurrection. Libel confirms that this is indeed part of the objective, though the dungeons cleared so far are insufficient. When questioned about the scale required, Mai admits she does not measure power in human rankings. She recalls that when the idea of targeting a massive dungeon was first raised, it was dismissed as suicidal. Libel reinforces this concern, stating that they cannot risk exposing such a crucial individual to mortal danger again. In response, our MC clenches his fist and requests permission to undertake the mission alone. Libel calls the plan reckless, questioning whether he has any strategy at all, warning that without preparation, the outcome would mirror Elvina's fate. Our MC admits the risk and acknowledges that he has no clear method to grow stronger or secure victory. Even so, he insists that if this is the only way to save her, he cannot choose another path. He reminds Libel that before anything else, he made a pact with him. The Demon King agrees, though hesitation remains evident. Suddenly, blood drips from the Demon King and falls onto the grass of the sacred garden. The blood gathers and takes form, shaping itself into a butler. The figure declares that if this is the chosen course, then he will personally resolve the problem. The man in the suit finishes his statement, making it clear that he will personally train RMC. RMC recognizes the butler and recalls that he was the one who fought Saki earlier. He remembers Mei addressing him as Vento and also recalls that he was among those who supported the idea of conquest. However, Vento warns that, given the boy's current level, sacrifices will be unavoidable. Faced with everyone's resolve, Libel finally agrees to the decision. Given the circumstances, Libel entrusts our MC to Vento for the next 7 days, and the butler accepts the responsibility. He then turns and leads our MC toward the training location. The boy hurries to keep up, placing his trust in Vento to help him grow stronger. Mei feels relieved, knowing how powerful Vento is, but Libel immediately orders her to accompany them and supervise the training. The Demon King reflects on how Vento opposed involving a human until the very end of the discussion. Because of that, he worries that the butler may go too far and potentially kill the boy during training. The maid reacts with slight surprise at the sudden order. Moments later, they're enveloped by a massive blue teleportation magic circle. RMC feels tense, unsure of what awaits him. Upon arrival, he is astonished by the surroundings and wonders if the place truly exists within a dungeon. Vento explains that this area represents only a fraction of Libel's power and that each executive was granted an entire floor. He adds that Yuki is the first human to ever witness these floors and that it should be regarded as an honor. Our MC reflects that resurrection must be treated as a last resort if it requires sacrificing so many floors. He then considers what the training will involve and whether leveling up will be part of it. Vento explains that leveling up is the process of extracting mana from monsters and integrating it into oneself. Our MC realizes that adventurers can damage entire dungeons simply by fighting, but Vento clarifies that because of the contract with Libel, he cannot level up in the usual way. Understanding now why he was sent to other dungeons, Yuki wonders what this training will actually consist of. Without warning, the butler throws a sword toward him. He catches it in surprise and briefly assumes the training will focus on improving his equipment. Vento quickly dismisses that notion, stating that the boy lacks even a basic foundation and has much to learn. He explains that achieving anything requires strength, knowledge, and talent. Immediately afterward, a powerful wave of energy strikes RMC without warning. Vento makes it clear that if the boy truly wants Elvina back, he must build the strength he currently lacks. Preparing to attack, the butler signals that the boy must rebuild himself from the ground up. RMC struggles to defend as Vento moves far faster than he can process. The butler continues to press him, making it clear that if the boy cannot withstand this, then entrusting him with fate itself would be foolish. Overwhelmed by the pressure, Yuki remains firm in his resolve. Vento declares that he alone will judge the boy's intentions and that everything he does is for the sake of the dungeon and its ruler. At that moment, RMC understands that Vento does not care whether he survives the training. The butler charges forward, demanding that the boy endure 3 full hours, reinforcing that combat is the most effective teacher. Their blades clash with immense force, marking the start of their battle. Driven by determination, Yuki commits himself fully and activates his magic Eye of Truth. The skill reveals Vento's water attribute and the technique known as Blue Flower Blade. The boy immediately realizes that a single direct hit would be fatal and that the difference in level between them is overwhelming. Accepting this, he concludes that survival depends not on defense, but on positioning himself where danger does not exist. Vento questions whether this ability is the only skill at his disposal. As the attack continues, the butler strikes him away and criticizes his delayed reactions, emphasizing that hesitation in battle is no different from inviting death. Another attack follows, triggering repeated danger warnings from the eye. The sheer speed forces Yuki to barely react in time. Deciding to shift tactics, he launches an offensive attack with his glowing sword. Vento blocks it effortlessly, making it clear that reckless aggression changes nothing. In a flash, the butler retaliates with overwhelming speed, sending RMC flying. He pauses briefly, observing the boy with a serious, disappointed expression. Even so, Vento acknowledges that the boy's movements have improved slightly since the start of the fight. RMC realizes that through his eye, he can read sword movements and understand how to respond. He recognizes that his ability is not merely about raw statistics, but about fully comprehending how opponents move. A torn piece of the butler's clothing falls to the ground, confirming that the boy is not simply reacting blindly. Still, Vento warns that even with such an ability, victory remains impossible. He explains that their physical structures differ entirely, resulting in vastly different sword control. RMC is stunned as he realizes that Vento has been holding back the entire time. As their blades clash again, the butler highlights the massive gap in combat experience between them. Yuki feels his limbs reaching their limits as danger warnings continue to flood his vision. His eye reveals that Vento has not even relied on magic, proving that he exists on a completely different level. Despite this, the boy refuses to give up and charges forward once more, determined to one day surpass him. Vento considers whether this resolve is merely recklessness or something far deeper. Acknowledging the determination before him, he prepares to fight seriously. Activating his skill, Vento becomes enveloped in an energy of blood and darkness. RMC is overwhelmed as his vision floods with danger alerts, rendering him unable to see clearly. In that moment, he realizes that survival does not depend on warnings, but on understanding the ability itself. Shifting his focus, he abandons the alerts and concentrates entirely on extracting usable information. Pouring all of his power into his eye, he forces it to reveal the nature of the technique. The skill is exposed as one that transforms blood into blades, directing them toward the target. The butler launches his powerful technique, Bloodflower Blade, to test him. As his eye glows intensely, our MC braces himself for the impact. The attack detonates directly on him, filling the area with smoke and debris. For a moment, the butler remains still, observing the aftermath of his strike. He then approaches the fallen body with a stern expression. Suddenly, our MC awakens in a luxurious bed, disoriented and confused. Vento sits nearby, calmly noting that he has finally woken from his forced rest. Rising from his chair, the butler picks up a book and signals for the boy to follow him, stating that the next phase of training is about to begin. Yuki still remembers the moment the attack landed and had believed it was the end. He wonders about his injuries and learns that I intervened before his death, restoring him at the last moment. Vento remarks that although crude, the boy attempted to replicate his technique using the magic eye just before losing consciousness. That audacity earns the butler's interest, as he admits curiosity about how far the young man might progress. From that point onward, he makes it clear that the true training has only just begun. The butler opens a massive door, revealing the next stage. Inside, numerous monsters await. The task is simple but overwhelming, as the boy is expected to face all of them. RMC turns pale, sweat forming as the scale of the challenge becomes clear. Vento acknowledges the numbers, but demands that the boy deal with it and prove his worth. Though shaken, Yuki steels himself, already accustomed to facing situations where survival is uncertain. The scene shifts, and our MC is now dressed as a butler, confused by the situation. He soon realizes he is serving tea in a hall filled with monsters, including one with a bat flying nearby. Vento explains that an elite swordsman eliminates waste in all actions, and that a butler's discipline allows no unnecessary movement. Through this role, the boy must learn to control his body while simultaneously sharpening his eye. Activating his skill, RMC learns that abilities develop through consistent use. Several monsters attend the gathering, and his task is to understand each one's intent and desires. Accepting the challenge, he begins by carefully observing their movements. Vento demonstrates how to serve tea with flawless precision, every action deliberate and efficient. The display ends with perfect posture and absolute control. Attempting to imitate the demonstration, our MC quickly loses balance, dropping an entire stack of plates and shattering them across the floor. As he cleans the mess, he realizes that observation alone is not enough. Simply copying movements does not work. He must adapt everything to suit his own body and instincts. By the second day, he appears calmer. One of the monsters confronts him directly, knocking him aside and testing his resolve. The sudden assault forces the boy to adapt quickly. Lacking stamina, he compensates by relying heavily on his eye, entering combat with full focus. Through the exchange, he gains practical experience, learning far more from direct confrontation than from observation alone. By the fourth day, he encounters a cold-blooded lizard monster. His eye reveals that the creature is suffering from a chill condition. From this, he understands that success requires analysis, prediction, and proper response rather than brute force. Through careful interaction, he learns that monsters differ greatly from humans, each driven by unique needs. Serving the creature properly, he begins to grasp the true purpose of this training and why Vinto chose this method. On the sixth day, he encounters a small bat monster suffering from hunger. Attempting to help by predicting its needs, he is caught off guard when the creature feeds directly on his blood, revealing a vampiric ability. The incident reinforces the importance of caution and adaptability, even when intentions are correct. By the seventh and final day, our MC serves tea with steady hands and composed confidence. His movements are efficient, precise, and calm. The cup is placed flawlessly, reflecting everything he has learned over the past week. As he awaits judgment, Vinto evaluates the result, acknowledging that while some elements remain subjective, the boy's composure and execution meet the standard. Reflecting on the past 7 days, our MC realizes the training was a relentless cycle of combat and service. Despite everything, he endured it all and emerged changed. At the final moment, he manages to complete the intense training he has endured. However, Viento immediately stops him, warning that everything truly begins from this point onward. Without hesitation, the butler activates his Bloodflower Blady skill and prepares to strike. The sudden display shocks the young man, making it clear that the true final battle of the training has begun. Viento observes calmly, explaining that the boy can now activate his eye instantly, something he himself once imitated. He emphasizes that imitation alone is not enough, and that the skill must be transformed into something personal to secure victory. With a stern presence, the butler makes it clear that failure here will lead only to defeat. The young man remains unfazed, fully aware that failing now would mean he deserves the outcome. His eye glows as he begins analyzing his master's movements. Viento meets his gaze with red eyes, prepared for the final clash of the training. Through his perception, the technique becomes clearer than ever, revealing the process of turning blood into a blade. With his sword ready, the young man prepares himself for combat. He cuts his own hand, demonstrating that he now understands how to use his body as part of his fighting style. In response, he activates the Blue Flower Blady skill, signaling the start of the final exchange. Their swords collide, releasing a violent surge of blood energy. This time, the young man overcomes his master, landing a clean strike across Viento's chest. The force of the blow sends the butler backward, clearly surprised by the result. As he lies on the ground, he reflects on the exchange, wondering if he misjudged a step. Meanwhile, the young man recalls Elvina and the fact that he has yet to save her from her fate. Refusing to accept imposed limits, he rises again. Drawing upon the blood scattered across the ground, he activates his skill once more, pouring everything into it. This time, he reshapes the technique entirely, transforming the blood into countless blades. Viento realizes that the skill has not only been copied, but redefined. The young man presses forward, turning the battle into one of sheer volume as innumerable blades surge toward his master. He launches a final attack, determined to surpass him completely. The strike connects, but Viento manages to stop the blade with his bare hand. Despite his exhaustion, the young man waits for acknowledgement. The butler recognizes the achievement, but points out the limitations of the technique, noting that it cannot be used repeatedly in quick succession. Accepting the truth, the young man admits that he has reached his limit. His strength gives out, and he begins to collapse, only to be caught before hitting the ground. As he loses consciousness, his phone slips unnoticed from his pocket. Carrying him away, the butler notes that there is still much left for him to learn in the future. The phone remains on the ground, receiving information from Saki regarding the dungeon he inquired about. Elsewhere, she wonders if he will be safe, even with the assistance she provided. Though reassured by the presence of others, her concern does not fade. As she reviews the documents, it becomes clear that the mission involves exploring a B-rank dungeon with an unidentified boss, making it especially dangerous. Later, within Libel's dungeon, the young man declares his intention to enter the dungeon the following day. The Demon King observes with quiet approval, noting that the boy has gained some strength. He acknowledges his improvement with the sword, though questions arise about how an E-rank adventurer intends to approach a B-rank dungeon. The explanation is simple: participation as investigation support rather than conquest. It becomes apparent that the real goal is to seize an opportunity if one presents itself. When asked about forming a contract, the young man already knows his choice. The answer leaves Viento stunned and catches the others off guard as well. Faced with the decision, Libel questions whether the young man truly understands what he is saying. The scene shifts to the Adventurers Guild, where Saki greets him warmly upon seeing him again. She notices the sword he carries and realizes that he has begun training with one. The request he makes is met without hesitation, as she is accustomed to handling similar matters. Having someone familiar nearby is a welcome relief for her. Soon, additional adventurers arrive, eager to participate. They inquire about his identity and learn that they are temporary volunteers who accepted the mission through the guild. Their intention is to level up efficiently by joining an operation involving a high-ranked adventurer. When his rank is revealed, their reaction is immediate and dismissive. Despite their objections, Saki remains firm. She points out his previous dungeon clears, though he privately acknowledges that those victories were not achieved entirely alone. The volunteers argue that investigations, not conquests, are necessary for proper evaluation. Frustration grows among them, as expectations of an easy advancement begin to crumble. Saki corrects their misunderstanding, reminding them that the mission is strictly an investigation. With that clarified, she begins outlining the true objective of the mission, which centers entirely on the dungeon itself. From there, the group enters the sealed Cave of Desires, a B-rank dungeon. As they proceed, Saki provides an explanation of how dungeon ranks are determined, noting that they are almost always judged by the level of the boss. Stronger bosses result in more complex first floors and a greater number of total floors. As they move deeper, monsters begin emerging along the path and attacking the group. Questions arise about how the threat level can be determined when the boss itself cannot be found. The explanation is that the boss cannot be located on any floor, regardless of how thoroughly they search. The more measures a boss takes to protect itself, the more difficult the investigation becomes. As a result, the dungeon's rank is estimated based on the size of the first floor and the total number of floors. Due to the boss's extreme elusiveness, the investigation request was escalated to an S-rank adventurer. Suddenly, one of the volunteers reacts to a creature emerging from the ground and attacks it with his axe. This immediately causes tension among the volunteers, who begin competing over the kill. Their behavior highlights how dungeon complexity contributes directly to its danger. One of them, Gata, proudly shows off his victory, clearly seeking Saki's approval. His attitude only adds to her stress, while the young man silently reflects on how demanding it must be to hold an S-rank position. Gata then turns his attention toward the young man, openly provoking him and dismissing his presence. He boasts that as long as he and the others are there, Saki will remain safe. However, his confidence collapses when he senses something approaching. Behind him, a massive stone form begins to assemble, leaving him frozen in fear. Moments later, multiple golems with glowing eyes emerge, preparing to attack the entire party. Faced with the sudden threat, Saki and the young man prepare for combat. She immediately moves forward, activating one of her skills and cutting through the stone creatures with precise and rapid strikes. The speed of her attack leaves Gata unable to fully perceive it, making the gap in strength unmistakable. She makes it clear that the volunteers are not needed for combat and should focus solely on investigation to avoid unnecessary losses. At the same time, the young man moves to assist, cutting through a golem with remarkable accuracy. The creature is cleanly divided, demonstrating the precision of his timing. Saki notices that his strike aligns perfectly with her own attack and recognizes that he managed to keep up with her movements despite his limited experience with the sword. The result exceeds her expectations, and she acknowledges his contribution as genuinely helpful. As the group regains composure, the unusual nature of the dungeon becomes more apparent, with monsters emerging directly from the walls. Saki instructs the volunteers to remain focused on investigation while she handles combat. Frustrated by his lack of contribution, Gata becomes determined to locate the boss room himself. Despite their efforts, 10 hours pass without progress, and the group remains trapped on the same floor. The map is carefully analyzed, but no correct path reveals itself. There is still no sign of the boss room, and exhaustion begins to weigh on everyone. Saki continues down the corridor, considering their remaining options, noting that there is no visible path leading to another floor and that every area has already been searched. The young man places his hand against the wall and considers what lies beyond it. His action draws mockery from one of the volunteers, who dismisses the idea and explains that a dungeon is formed from mana rather than physical matter. Attempting to intimidate him, the man moves closer and emphasizes that digging into the wall would only result in injury from the mana layer. However, as the young man's eye activates, his perception tells him otherwise. He realizes that the wall and the entire cave is made of the same substance as the golems they encountered earlier. His analysis identifies it as clay golem material. Understanding the implication immediately, Saki orders everyone to move back. She unleashes her luminous slash directly into the wall. The attack lands head-on, triggering a massive explosion and tearing open a hidden passage. As debris settles, the newly revealed opening becomes clear, and the group is urged to move quickly into the space beyond. They pass through the opening and arrive somewhere completely unexpected. As they look around, it becomes clear that they are no longer inside a cave, but standing in an open, desert-like expanse. The sudden change leaves everyone momentarily stunned. Using his keen perception, the young man studies the surroundings, trying to grasp what this place truly is. Their attention is drawn upward when a massive silhouette of a gigantic creature comes into view. The sight alone overwhelms Gata with fear. Saki, however, remains focused and calmly reaches a conclusion. She explains that they were never inside a normal dungeon to begin with. Instead, the dungeon itself was a colossal golem, disguising its interior as a sealed cave. The realization causes panic among the volunteers, but Saki clarifies the purpose behind it. The golem existed to falsify the dungeon's rank and conceal its true danger. The young man understands immediately that this open desert is the real first floor, meaning the dungeon's actual rank is far higher than originally believed. Saki activates a device and shares the data she uncovered. According to the information, this is not a B-rank dungeon at all, but an enormous A-rank dungeon, already nearing the threshold of S-rank classification. The so-called sealed cave was merely a camouflage layer, and the scale of the true dungeon is so vast that it gives the illusion of being outdoors. In the distance, a floating castle looms over the horizon, reinforcing just how abnormal the environment is. She explains that the golem's role was to prevent an S-rank dungeon from being discovered or conquered prematurely. Now that it has failed its duty, it has likely shut itself down to conserve what little mana remains. This leads to a broader observation that dungeons act as frontline entities against humanity's enemies. The young man reflects on his encounters with intelligent dungeon beings and recalls that some possess strategy, awareness, and even emotions similar to humans. Saki considers the situation fortunate despite the danger. Discovering the dungeon before it fully evolves into an S-rank threat gives them a rare opportunity. With that conclusion, she declares that the investigation phase is over and that the dungeon conquest begins now. She instructs the volunteers to retreat and report back to the guild, noting that the exit is close. The young man refuses to leave. He makes it clear that he intends to fight alongside her. Saki turns to him, questioning his resolve, but sees unwavering determination reflected in his eyes. She agrees, explaining that if things turn disastrous, someone must carry the boss information back. She decides that he is the most suitable choice for that responsibility. Her expression hardens as she grabs him firmly, making it clear that this time they will return alive together. He accepts without hesitation. Thoughts of his past surface, his lost family, and the tragedy at the orphanage, strengthening his resolve. As the mark on his hand reacts, he silently vows that he will not allow anyone else to die in front of him. Without delay, Saki lifts him and activates her movement skill. With explosive speed, they shoot forward, kicking up clouds of dust. Behind them, Gata struggles to keep up, complaining about the chaos but refusing to retreat. On the ground, a strangely glowing stone appears to guide their path. Following the shortest route, they head straight toward the floating castle. Saki clears the way with overwhelming force, shattering obstacles effortlessly. They soon arrive inside a massive hall and land safely, surrounded by wings of light fading away. The density of mana immediately stands out, leading Saki to wonder if this is already the lowest floor. The space ahead opens into a vast throne room filled with towering golden crystals. From the ceiling, a humanoid figure made entirely of crystal appears, hanging upside down. Her gaze locks onto them, and the young man immediately recognizes her as the dungeon boss. She reveals herself as a jewel golem, declaring her ambition to become the most beautiful demon king. Saki realizes that the boss had been quietly gathering mana over time, and the golem confirms that she has been refining herself to evolve. The jewel golem initiates combat, activating her cutting technique and advancing without hesitation. The young man immediately analyzes the situation using his ability, allowing both of them to evade the initial assault. He notes that her attack speed is deadly and would have been fatal if it connected, but compared to his training against Viento, her movements feel almost static. The boss boasts about the durability of her body, claiming it surpasses even the golems they faced earlier. He acknowledges this, but focuses on creating a single opening. With precise timing, he intercepts her attack just long enough for Saki to move in. Understanding his intent instantly, Saki unleashes her luminous slash once more. The strike lands cleanly, cracking the jewel golem's blade and leaving visible damage. The boss reacts with surprise, clearly unaccustomed to being harmed. Saki presses the advantage, demonstrating that while the body may be hard, it is not indestructible. As the battle continues, the young man observes from the side, struck by how overwhelming an S-rank adventurer's combat ability truly is, even while injured. The jewel golem reacts to the pain but remains composed, which makes Saki uneasy. Sensing that the boss is far from finished, she prepares for whatever comes next. The young man cautions her not to lower her guard, and she acknowledges the warning. With that, the swordswoman moves forward, preparing a continuous assault meant to end the fight. However, the dungeon boss reacts with a twisted smile, having already identified their weakness. She activates a large-scale technique, channeling an enormous amount of mana. Despite the surge, nothing immediately changes within the hall. Moments later, Saki realizes what is happening. From a distance, Gata shouts that the golem has regenerated and is blocking the path to the gate. It becomes clear that the boss is reclaiming material from the destroyed golems and reinforcing herself elsewhere. She then traps the remaining volunteers inside energy cocoons, making it clear that they will not survive if left unattended. Saki understands the dilemma instantly. If she focuses on rescuing the others, the boss will act freely. If she stays, the trapped volunteers will perish. The young man steps forward and draws her attention, urging her to save them. He explains that the boss cannot be left unsupervised, even for a moment. With his sword ready, he positions himself in front of the enemy, fully prepared to face her alone. Saki accepts his decision without hesitation. Trusting his growth and potential, she leaves the confrontation to him and departs to rescue the others. The dungeon boss mocks the situation, viewing him as nothing more than a disposable pawn. He rejects that notion, recognizing it instead as an act of trust. He recalls how others, despite their different roles, placed their faith in him during critical moments. Standing here now is the result of that belief, and he knows he must answer it with everything he has. The boss senses his rising mana and questions how he possesses power comparable to a monster. He remains composed, deciding to fight as someone who understands monsters rather than fears them. He warns her that his technique originates from something far stronger than she is. She's unsettled by the fact that he managed to cut her despite her reinforced body. He explains that he saw through her movements and eliminated all unnecessary motion. In response, the boss reconstructs her weapon and regenerates, confident that her new form cannot be countered. She attacks again, certain that she will pierce him this time. He meets the strike head-on, parrying it calmly. Though the attack appears to land cleanly, he remains unharmed, having allowed the contact intentionally. The boss is confused by his composure. In the next moment, he appears behind her and strikes, using the hardness of her own body against itself. Cracks spread through her form as she realizes she has been manipulated from the start. The mark on his hand reacts, confirming his control over the situation. Enraged, she lashes out, furious at the damage to her crystal body. He responds evenly, noting that the battle is far from over. He then activates a technique that alters her condition, causing her crystal form to undergo forced transformation through compression and restructuring. As her body changes, she asserts her dominance as the dungeon's master, claiming unmatched durability and beauty. He observes the transformation calmly, focused entirely on her movements. Growing massive, she threatens to crush him beneath her overwhelming form. He advances without hesitation and strikes her leg. She dismisses the attack, believing size alone guarantees superiority. He questions that assumption, continuing his assault. He recognizes that size is not what determines value, but precision. What truly matters is the quality of the cut. He then activates his own refined version of the technique he learned before. Blood spreads across his face as he steadies himself. The boss is stunned that human can wield a power resembling that of monsters. He remains composed, fully aware that this is his own way of fighting. Countless blood-forged blades erupt and pierce her crystal body from every direction. In a single sequence, he shatters her form completely. Exhausted, he realizes that while the technique worked in real combat, its toll is far greater than expected. Using his own blood places an immense burden on his body. As he turns, he discovers that the boss has survived by reconstructing herself at the cost of most of her original form. She explains that he paid too great a price for that power. He remains focused, having already read her movements. As she attacks again, he acknowledges that he is reaching his physical limit. Even so, he activates his technique once more, forcing it into his own style. Blood stains spread across his clothing, revealing how severe his injuries are. He admits that alone, he cannot finish the fight. However, he has already prepared another solution. He summons one of his contracted monsters, and a small bat appears beside him. The creature feeds quickly, preparing to activate its ability. From afar, observers recognize what he is attempting. The bat's ability draws blood to sustain his technique. Because he can only maintain a single contract, failure would put his life at risk. His earlier attack using his own blood was deliberate, meant to lower the boss's guard. The plan relied on using his own vulnerability as bait. The strategy is dangerous, but effective. Remembering how the bat once drained him during training, he commits fully to the plan, determined to see it through. The dungeon boss realizes that the boy had been aiming for this strategy from the very beginning. He faces the villainous with his sword in hand and the bat resting on his shoulder, identifying himself as Yuki, a monster tamer. He recognizes himself as an adventurer who fights using everything available to him, whether enemies or allies. The villainous is left stunned and barely manages to react before being struck. The final blow lands, and the dungeon boss is defeated, bursting apart in a flash of light. Yuki affirms that he is still human, even with a contract tied to a demon king. As the boss collapses, mana rapidly gathers throughout the dungeon, causing a burning sensation in his eyes. With the mark on his hand glowing, he judges that the released power is sufficient and prepares to absorb it. Completely drained, he relies on Libel's support to complete the process. Saki soon arrives and catches him as he falters, apologizing for the delay. She's shocked to realize he defeated the boss alone. He admits he cannot stand due to anemia and asks for her assistance. The scene transitions to a press conference filled with reporters. A suited official thanks the audience and announces a special case involving the investigated E-rank dungeon. He explains that the individual involved will give a direct report. The reporters erupt with excitement, focusing on the unprecedented situation surrounding the dungeon. The person credited most for the mission is revealed, and attention shifts to Saki, introduced as the heroine of the dangerous operation. The press reacts wildly, questioning her about the dungeon's danger level and the presence of intelligent monsters. As she summarizes the conquest, she privately reflects on how Yuki once again left the burden to her. A brief memory surfaces of him, saying he had something important to handle before disappearing without finishing his recovery. She wonders what could have been important enough to leave so abruptly. Back within Libel's domain, Yuki rushes to inquire about the resurrection ritual. Mai responds that the final stage is being completed. Libel warns him to look away, as the magic could overwhelm his eyes, but he admits he can feel the immense energy regardless. Mai activates the ritual while holding a music box, declaring that Elvina's rest has ended. Light fills the chamber, and Elvina awakens. Relieved, Yuki rushes to her side, confirming her revival. She's confused by his presence and briefly wonders about his fate before realizing she was the one brought back. Mai admits she feared Elvina's sacrifice had been in vain. Yuki exhales in relief, grateful that everything succeeded. Libel interrupts, reminding them of their duties and ordering them to prepare. New attire is presented, and Yuki is impressed by its quality. Viento remarks that he will be the centerpiece of what follows. Beyond the open passage, numerous monsters await, thanking him for saving them. He is bewildered by the reception. Libel explains that the dungeon he cleared released vast mana, allowing more revivals than expected. Mai admits exhaustion from the effort. The monsters gather around him, astonished that a human saved them and eager to celebrate. Elvina pulls him away, concerned about the attention. Libel watches calmly, wine in hand, stating that Yuki's past choice is the reason they survived. Yuki insists he did not act for praise. His eye glows faintly as he recalls another girl from his past, memories of the orphanage, and the tragedy that destroyed it. Seeing the saved monsters reinforces his resolve to prevent such loss from happening again. Though determined, he is quietly glad they were saved. Light-hearted teasing follows as Libel and Viento comment on Yuki's influence. Libel admits that while he initially intended to use the boy, the outcome was reversed, producing results beyond expectations. He privately concludes that Yuki will become central to future plans. The scene returns to the press conference as Saki reacts sharply to a disturbing accusation. A mysterious man demands the individual who truly cleared the dungeon. The tension escalates, and later, the scene shifts to a dark alley where the same man attacks someone. A phone showing the press conference shatters on the ground. The attacker learns the name Yuki, confirming his target. The injured man is silenced to prevent the truth from spreading, and flames consume the alley. Later, Yuki walks calmly through a park carrying flowers, enjoying a rare moment among ordinary people. He decides to take a brief break from dungeon life. He arrives at a memorial dedicated to victims of a past dungeon collapse, reflecting on his journey and the people he lost. As he approaches, he notices someone waiting. The man reveals himself as an A-rank adventurer named Zapper, claiming they share the same profession. He states his intent to recruit Yuki, referencing the fake dungeon's clearance. Yuki grows tense, realizing his involvement has been exposed. Despite attempting to downplay his role, it becomes clear the truth is already known. The encounter ends with the realization that Yuki's actions can no longer remain hidden. Zapper reveals that the white flash destroyed the golem in seconds, leaving Yuki shocked. He realizes the man knows he has the skill to defeat an A-rank boss. Meanwhile, Zapper questions why he is hiding, saying that clearing dungeons isn't like a normal job and that having weak pawns doesn't help. He explains that to earn real rewards, one must have the strongest weapons in the world. Yuki hesitates, unsure if the man is referring to him as such a weapon. Zapper approaches, asserting that even with strong skills, there's a limit to what one can accomplish alone. He continues, explaining that in a party, the situation may differ even if the rewards are smaller. With a clenched fist, he claims that together they could conquer far more dangerous dungeons. He then invites Yuki to join him, promising they could earn immense rewards together. Yuki thanks Zapper for valuing him in such a strange way, but politely refuses, stating that his goal isn't to make money from dungeons. Unfazed, the man in the hood remarks that rejection doesn't bother him and hints at another approach. A red magic circle appears, and Zapper warns that it's time to use brute force. Yuki is stunned as the magic activates in the city park. Zapper attacks with a fire hammer, sending Yuki flying and igniting the bouette he was carrying. Startled, Yuki asks why he's using magic in the city. Zapper smiles, saying that dodging his attack makes him even more valuable to the group. Yuki yells for him to stop, citing the sacred nature of the park. The villain shrugs, admitting surface-level magic is illegal, but warning that refusing him would be far worse. He attacks again with stone chains, trapping Yuki. Despite being immobilized, Yuki activates an ice prison, freezing the villain's hand. Zapper comments that Yuki is his opposite, designed for dungeon clearing, and throws him to the ground, threatening to follow him into every dungeon to attack repeatedly. He boasts that even calling the guild or S ranks won't stop him, claiming that as a skilled killer, no one can oppose him. Yuki feels powerless, and Zapper departs, promising to return. Far away, Libel watches and glares at Zapper, irritated by his audacity in attempting to steal his pawn. He mutters, "That was very rude." The scene shifts to Yuki at the monster base with Mai. He begins planning his next move. Viento questions why he hasn't brought his sword. Yuki explains it's his day off in the city and admits that even with his weapon, he would have struggled against Zapper's magic. Libel reminds him that as a monster tamer, he has other options. Following the Demon King's advice, Yuki summons a creature skilled in magic. An elf named Mura appears, complaining she was in the middle of important research. Yuki notes that no one understands magic better than her. Libel instructs her to study the abyss, but she seems reluctant. Makina explains she is Vince's best disciple, but dislikes the old man, having never attended tea parties or similar events with the other monsters. She is over 1,000 years old, 1,499 to be exact, and Yuki is shocked by the scale. Determined, she vows to make Vento's disciple even stronger than the master. Makina fantasizes about a forbidden love, but Yuki interrupts and asks her to teach him magic. She agrees, finding the idea fun and noting that developing magic requires stimulation. Entering a giant library, Yuki is shocked at the sheer number of books on magic. Makina declares him disciple number 1 and asserts that he does not yet understand real magic. She begins the lesson with the question, what's the difference between magic and skills? Yuki considers this carefully. Makina explains that skills are personal abilities, while magic is universal. Skills fall into 3 categories: those obtained through a profession, those inherent to a race, and those derived from master techniques. Each depends on unique talents, making some impossible to copy. Yuki recalls using the bloodflower blade in his own style and agrees, realizing magic must be the complete opposite. Makina confirms, explaining that magic with identical power yields the same results for anyone. She demonstrates this with a glowing finger, defining real magic as a universal law, absolute for all. Yuki, excited, asks why not everyone uses magic. Makina answers that magic is difficult, not because of mana, but because original spells require incantations the size of entire books. Yuki recalls Zapper's short spell that trapped him, noting the contrast. Makina explains that understanding the spell allows flexibility and that tools, magic circles, or internal recitation can simplify casting. She demonstrates incantation emission by summoning a fire hammer with minimal effort, explaining that the result depends on comprehension. Yuki realizes that even if a spell appears identical, results vary by user. Makina shows that one can cast partially and complete the rest later, and Yuki finally understands magic isn't just memorization. She hands him a book, warning that memorization alone limits him. A spell is a command. Without understanding, new magic cannot be created. Yuki compares it to learning a new language, noting he already struggles with calculus. Makina acknowledges human limitations and uses a spell called Live in the library, creating a massive magic circle. Yuki tenses as he is transported to a fiery world, asking where he is. Makina explains it simulates the book's content so he can experience it, effectively a virtual dungeon where he will learn everything. Confident, Yuki grips his sword, ready to fight. Suddenly, countless enemies appear. Makina warns him that today he must study all attributes and basic transformations. Facing 2 giant snakes, Yuki asks if she intends to cover everything. She smiles and challenges him not to say it's impossible. A dark creature charges at full speed. Yuki responds confidently with a loud, simple no, unleashing a powerful blue sword attack. Makina watches, satisfied and slightly surprised, as Yuki declares with glowing eyes that he will finish everything in an instant. Yuki draws his sword and confidently declared he'd finish everything in no time. 3 days later, the harsh training continued on Mura's floor inside Libel's dungeon. Violent tornadoes spun through the area, while a giant eagle monster charged through the sky with an ear-piercing screech. Yuki desperately tried to recite an incantation to interfere with the wind attribute, but the environment itself was too chaotic. The force of the wind sent him flying, yet he kept chanting through gritted teeth. At the last second, Makina used air catch, creating a giant compressed hand of wind that stopped him before he crashed into the ground. Calmly watching him sprawled across the floor, she commented that her disciple truly had no talent for magic. Yuki finally understood why adventurers rarely used full incantations in real combat. The opening was simply too large. Makina explained that magic had never originally been designed for battle. Its true purpose was to deceive and rewrite the world itself according to the caster's will. Yuki reflected on all the attributes he had learned so far: fire, earth, water, ice, and lightning, and believed those spells should have been powerful. However, when he attempted to cast stone arrow using shortened chanting, the tiny projectile barely flew before dropping uselessly to the floor. Shocked by the pathetic result, he realized that skipping parts of an incantation drastically reduced a spell's power. Makina explained that incantations were essentially commands used to rewrite reality through mana. Once parts of the command were omitted, the result became vague and unstable. She identified Yuki's greatest weakness immediately. He was terrible at compensating for missing sections with imagination, no matter what element he used. Once he attempted chantless casting or shortened incantations, the output became almost worthless. Yet if he relied on complete incantations for proper strength, he would never be fast enough to keep up with Zapper's combat speed. Zapper would simply overwhelm him with faster magic and elemental counters before he could finish casting. Makina warned him that elemental disadvantages would continue causing problems during battle. Some attributes naturally overpowered others, and Yuki still had many attributes left to study. Even so, she encouraged him not to give up. She suggested that perhaps wind would become the attribute he naturally excelled at, and used her air magic to throw him straight back into training. Yuki continued practicing while wondering if Zapper even possessed a weak element that could be exploited. Meanwhile, deep within the mountains surrounding the S-rank dungeon, Zapper and several adventurers had established a temporary camp. When he learned that Yuki had entered the dangerous dungeon alone, he was genuinely surprised. One of his men explained that after searching everywhere, they eventually discovered Yuki had gone directly into the infamous S-rank dungeon that even 2 S-rank parties had once failed to clear. Zapper found the situation amusing. Ordinary adventurers could barely even approach that place, yet Yuki willingly entered it alone. When his companions questioned what their next move should be, Zapper answered that it didn't matter because they were entering the dungeon as well. The others immediately panicked, warning him that the area was still filled with monsters and far too dangerous. Zapper calmly agreed that it was indeed dangerous. At that exact moment, a gigantic worm-like monster suddenly appeared above them. Its enormous mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth opened wide as it lunged directly at Zapper, ready to swallow him whole. Despite the terrifying attack, Zapper remained completely unfazed. In a single instant, he unleashed multiple attribute spells simultaneously, combining Water Lance, Ice Tusk, Stone Spear, Lightning Arrow, Storm Axe, and Fire Hammer all at once. The overwhelming magical barrage obliterated the monster instantly. One of the adventurers complained that Zapper had destroyed too much of the creature, leaving almost no valuable materials behind. Even so, the man could only stare in shock at the overwhelming display of power. Watching someone cast advanced magic across every elemental attribute so effortlessly made him finally understand why Zapper was considered an A-rank top-class mage. Zapper then explained that S-rank dungeons were exactly the kind of places where Yuki could disappear beyond their reach if they wasted time. Another adventurer pointed out that several members of their group had already died because of the monster attack, but Zapper showed no concern whatsoever. To him, they were merely replaceable B-rank adventurers. If they died, he could simply recruit more later. When a man criticized him for being heartless despite having enough power to save them, Zapper coldly replied that he would never waste his precious mana on people like that, declaring that his magic existed only for capturing someone truly special. He firmly stated that all of his power would be used to obtain Yuki. Meanwhile, Makina watched her disciple with an expression filled with boredom. Yuki was collapsed on the ground like his soul had already left his body, exhausted after countless failures. She bluntly told him that he had absolutely no talent for becoming anything special. Yuki had originally believed magic was universal and equal for everyone, but despite all his effort, he couldn't even perform a successful incantation breach. Makina admitted it was the first time she had ever seen someone fail so badly, even with shortened chance. If he struggled with the major elemental attributes, then minor attributes like insect magic would be even more hopeless. Yuki accepted that he had gained knowledge from the training, but he never expected his natural talent to be this terrible. All he could think about was mocking use of whatever little ability he had. Makina immediately scolded him for acting as though he already understood magic. When he tried to defend himself, she revealed the shocking truth. Their training hadn't even reached the first stage yet. According to her, they hadn't even started warming up. With unusual enthusiasm, Makina declared that magic existed so anyone could rewrite the world itself. It was created to crush dissatisfaction, injustice, and even common sense. Because of that, she refused to tolerate words like compromise or surrender. Confused, Yuki asked how someone like him was supposed to accomplish that. Makina answered simply, He had already witnessed something similar before during his encounter with Viento. Instead of mastering existing magic, he needed to create an entirely new kind of magic that only he could use. She explained that all the knowledge he had already learned was enough for him to start developing his own system. At his current level, he could already teach basic magic theory to beginners. Yuki was stunned by the realization. Even if he lacked talent for normal spells, he could create a form of magic specifically suited to himself. That was exactly what Makina wanted him to do. Rather than relying on long incantations, he needed to manipulate mana directly through emotion and instinct to reshape reality, then use incantations only as support if necessary. For battle-oriented magic, practical application mattered more than theory. From that point onward, Makina intended to train him personally in applied combat magic. In the middle of her explanation, Makina suddenly turned her head sharply to the side. Yuki immediately sensed something was wrong. Activating Aquavision, she created a floating sphere of water that displayed Zapper rampaging across the first floor of the dungeon while unleashing massive firewave attacks. The villain was actively searching for Yuki. To widen his range, he used Wind Search, sending mana throughout the dungeon. Seeing the image, Yuki was stunned. Zapper had already entered the dungeon and followed him all the way there. While Yuki panicked, Makina considered the situation perfect for training. She declared that this would be his chance to deal with Zapper using magic alone without relying on summons. Immediately afterward, she activated Shrine Drive. The spell was identical to the teleportation magic that had brought Yuki and his companions into the dungeon in the past. Yuki finally realized it was a high-level teleportation spell and wondered if Libel had intentionally assigned him to Makina's floor because of her ability to manipulate space itself. A moment later, Zapper was teleported directly into the same ruined battlefield as Yuki. The instant he saw him, Zapper concluded that Yuki had been hiding his true strength all along. He demanded an answer, but before Yuki could respond, Zapper attacked immediately with Aqua Javelin. Yuki barely dodged the incoming attack while unsheathing his sword. Zapper coldly stated that explanations were unnecessary because he could already read the truth written across Yuki's furious expression. Without hesitation, he activated Stone Jail to trap him, but Yuki sliced through the spell instantly. Zapper praised his reactions and admitted that Yuki truly had the instincts of a swordsman. He also noticed that Yuki didn't hesitate or panic when magic appeared around him anymore. However, Zapper immediately followed up with Mudbind. Yuki was shocked because the spell activated without the normal process of combining earth and water mana first. It was much faster than ordinary chantless casting. Yuki began reciting an incantation to counter it, but Zapper laughed at the attempt. Trying to interfere with his magic through chanting was pointless because he was overwhelmingly faster. He unleashed Wind Hammer directly at Yuki, striking him head-on. Watching him struggle, Zapper realized Yuki was still depending on incomplete incantations despite lacking the skill to use them properly. Yuki himself understood that there was no way he could defeat Zapper in a straightforward battle of magical casting speed. At that moment, he finally made his decision. Instead of copying existing systems, he would create an entirely new spell of his own. Zapper could tell from Yuki's glowing eyes alone that the young adventurer was planning something dangerous. As Zapper closed the distance between them, a chilling smile spread across his face. At that moment, he finally realized Yuki's true intention. The young adventurer had been preparing a lightning attack from the very beginning. Before he could fully react, the explosion sent Yuki flying backward across the battlefield. While being thrown through the air, Yuki came to a painful realization. There were certain forms of magic he would never naturally excel at because miracles had never once answered him. No matter how desperately he prayed in the past, nobody returned. Everyone he cared about had disappeared forever. A massive surge of power distorted the air itself as Zapper charged directly toward him for the finishing blow. The impact detonated violently, shattering giant stone pillars and sending debris scattering across the ruined battlefield. Zapper became convinced that he had finally ended the fight. Then his eyes widened in shock. Yuki was gone. Hidden within the chaos, Yuki admitted to himself that he truly didn't believe in miracles. To him, there was no such thing as convenient magic that saved people. He openly accepted that he still didn't properly understand magic itself. Suddenly, he heard Makina's voice calling out to him. Confused, he wondered where she was speaking from. Calmly, she explained that it was simply her magic at work. As Yuki struggled to grasp what he should do next, she offered him guidance. Makina explained that in terms of pure knowledge, he had already reached the level of a first-class mage. That meant he already possessed the ability to alter the world itself. The only thing missing was deciding what kind of magic he personally wanted to create. She then revealed the mindset behind her own magic. Whenever she created spells, her thoughts were always simple. She only asked herself whether it would be fun if such magic existed. According to her, Yuki needed to pour his emotions directly into his mana instead of forcing himself to imitate existing systems. Yuki immediately understood one thing clearly. The emotion he felt most strongly toward magic was rage. The instant he accepted that feeling, the stone pillar he had been hiding behind exploded apart. The battlefield descended deeper into chaos, and Yuki realized something terrifying about the unfairness of the world. The angrier someone became, the stronger they could grow. Zapper located him again and quickly realized that Yuki had absolutely no intention of surrendering. Instead of retreating, Yuki stepped forward and extended his hand toward the enemy. This time, he intended to use magic without any incantation at all. Zapper mirrored his stance and unleashed a massive firestorm, completely confident that no form of magic could overpower his own. The flames swept across the battlefield and brushed against Yuki's arm. For a moment, Zapper believed victory was certain. Then Yuki spoke. Instead of following the teachings of ordinary magic, he demonstrated a path completely opposite to everything Makina had taught him. There were no established lessons or theories for what he was doing, yet Makina watched from afar and considered it beautiful magic. Yuki had created a new spell entirely his own. Void Shield. The magic rejected magic itself. Yuki declared that this was his own form of magic, one that denied all other spells. Activating Void Shield, he became determined to prevent Zapper from using magic at all. Not even once. Zapper was stunned as his spells suddenly stopped functioning properly. One moment, the mana obeyed him, and the next it felt as though the world itself had rejected his commands. The sensation was deeply unnatural. At that point, Zapper completely abandoned the idea of recruiting Yuki into his party. Any desire to control him vanished instantly. Now he only wanted to eliminate him. He launched a lightning javelin directly at Yuki, but Yuki parried it cleanly. Immediately afterward, Zapper followed with Aqua Whip, slamming it into the shield. Cracks spread across the barrier on impact, and Yuki instantly realized his defense was approaching its limit. Meanwhile, Zapper noticed something horrifying. The shield wasn't merely defending against a specific element. It was nullifying every single attribute equally. More disturbingly, he could feel his mana itself being interfered with, as though the variable controlling the spells was being rejected before the magic could fully form. High above the battlefield, Makina quietly observed the clash while floating on her broom, watching Yuki's newly born magic take shape. From above the battlefield, Makina watched carefully as Zapper finally realized the truth behind Yuki's strange new power. Quietly, she acknowledged that the A-rank mage was genuinely skilled to have figured out so quickly. Original magic worked by conveying a caster's will into mana to alter the world itself. Yuki's power, however, was the complete opposite. Instead of forcing change onto the world, his mana commanded the surrounding mana not to change at all. If Makina had to classify it, she would call it the Void Attribute, a completely new form of magic born solely from Disciple Number 1's hatred toward magic itself. Zapper immediately understood the weakness of the ability. If magical alteration exceeded a certain threshold, overwhelming force might eventually break through the nullification. Without hesitation, he unleashed several elemental spells simultaneously in an attempt to overpower Yuki through sheer volume. Yuki calmly agreed with the logic. If he only stayed on the defensive, victory would be impossible. Instead, he combined his new power and created a Void Saber. The moment the blade formed, he slashed directly through the incoming attacks. Zapper was left stunned. Rather than destroying every spell entirely, Yuki erased only the most dangerous portions of the attacks, minimizing mana consumption with incredible precision. Watching the exchange, Makina felt proud despite herself. Yuki could technically use only a single attribute, yet his understanding and application of magic had already reached first-class level. Even so, she still disliked the influence of Viento's swordsmanship mixed into his fighting style. With void magic reinforcing his attacks, Yuki became confident he could finally reach Zapper directly. Panicking slightly, Zapper erected multiple defensive layers at once, summoning both an ice wall and a wind barrier. Yuki instantly erased the wind attribute while simply cutting apart the remaining ice with his sword. For the first time, Zapper found himself cornered. His magic was being interfered with constantly, and even his physical reinforcement spells were being neutralized by Yuki's blade. Desperate, he unleashed a massive fire wave, but Yuki immediately raised Void Shield again and blocked the entire attack. At that moment, Zapper realized something terrifying. If the fight continued like this, his mana reserves would collapse before Yuki's did. Desperately searching for a countermeasure, he continuously tried to think of a spell capable of breaking through the Void attribute. That brief hesitation created an opening. Yuki instantly activated his own version of Blood Petal Blade and launched a direct attack. The moment Zapper saw the technique, his eyes widened in alarm. He immediately understood that his remaining defenses would never survive a direct hit. Yuki pressed forward relentlessly, forcing Zapper onto the defensive. In desperation, the mage cast Air Hammer directly onto himself to forcibly propel his body away from the attack. The unexpected self-cast briefly stunned Yuki, allowing Zapper to escape the finishing blow. Breathing heavily, Zapper admitted that he would let Yuki go for now, but warned him there would not be a second chance. He swore that next time he would find a way to defeat that magic completely. Immediately afterward, he activated Wind Wing and fled through the sky. Yuki stared in surprise at how calmly Zapper chose to retreat, but he also understood the truth. If the battle had continued any longer, the mage likely would not have survived. Meanwhile, Makina furiously screamed at Yuki for allowing him to escape. She complained that if Zapper got away, Viento would definitely mock them endlessly about it later. She could already imagine the old butler's smug expression. Yuki admitted that he still had one final move prepared for emergencies. Looking down at the binding wrapped around his hand, he quietly asked if he could remove it. Then he tightened his grip around his sword. Far away, while escaping through the air, Zapper complained about how terrible he felt and began planning his next move once he returned. Suddenly, however, he sensed something horrifying behind him. Mana. A gigantic amount of mana. Yuki had begun reciting a full incantation. An ominous energy spread across the entire battlefield. Zapper was stunned beyond belief. Full chance required enormous preparation time and concentration. There should have been absolutely no way for Yuki to cast one that quickly. Yet the overwhelming mana was undeniably coming from Yuki's location. Immediately, Zapper increased the distance between them while casting Wind Boost to accelerate his escape. At the same time, Makina became curious about what Yuki was planning, especially after noticing that he had resorted to summoning. Then Mei appeared, calmly standing beside Yuki. She invoked the Mother of Chaos, where all are born and all must return. As she recited the incantation, violent energy swirled around her body. Yuki explained that, as a precaution in case his newly created magic failed, he had taught Mei the spell beforehand through telepathy and assigned the chanting to her instead. Magic was universal, meaning anyone could cast it if they completed the full incantation correctly. Mei eventually completed the spell and casually complained that Yuki treated his maids far too roughly. In that moment, Yuki demonstrated the mindset of a true monster tamer. He simply made his allies accomplish what he himself could not. Because Mei was undead, exhaustion from long chanting meant nothing to her. The maid released a massive dark arrow toward the fleeing mage. Zapper panicked immediately. Knowing he could not dodge it safely, he hastily cast Holy Shield in front of himself. However, the barrier was pierced instantly through the upper left side, and cracks rapidly spread across the entire shield. Then Zapper realized something horrifying about the attack. The projectile itself was infused with void magic exactly as Yuki had promised. To Yuki, miracles created by magic would never happen again. The void arrow exploded into a gigantic wave of dark purple energy that violently swallowed the sky itself. Zapper was hurled backward helplessly as the chaotic surge consumed everything around him, forcing a scream from the terrified mage. As he was consumed by the attack, Zapper hurled curses at Yuki. Makinami quietly admired the result, impressed by the power and precision of the magic. She praised Yuki and said he was surprisingly good at teaching magic. Yuki smiled and replied that it was only because he had such a great master. When the attack finally faded, the only thing left behind was Zapper's sunglasses. Meanwhile, at the surface entrance of Libel's dungeon, several armed men wearing white assassin-like uniforms gathered into formation. Their captain was still busy clearing another dungeon, but they believed they could handle the situation themselves. The only person they were truly wary of was Zapper. With that, the enforcement squad moved in to capture both him and Yuki. A few minutes later, Yuki finally emerged from the dungeon, carrying Zapper over his shoulder. Traversing an entire dungeon alone while carrying another person had clearly drained him. Even so, he intended to hand Zapper over to the guild immediately. However, before he could take more than a few steps, several armed men surrounded him and pointed their weapons in his direction. The moment Yuki saw the all-white uniforms, he immediately recognized them as the execution squad, the guild's public order specialist combat group. At first, he thought the timing was perfect since he had been planning to hand Zapper over anyway. But the instant he stepped forward, a wall of ice blocked his path. A short-haired woman in a white uniform ordered him to stop. She introduced herself as now a B-rank mage from the execution squad. Yuki couldn't understand why he was being treated like a criminal as well. Then Dugo, an A-rank monk from the squad, explained the situation. Multiple reports from adventurers claimed that Yuki was one of Zapper's party members. Because of those accusations, the execution squad intended to detain both of them in the name of maintaining public order. Yuki immediately tried to explain that he was actually the victim. But before he could finish, Zapper suddenly activated Fireburst. Flames erupted around the area, forcing the execution squad to pull back for a moment. Yuki instantly reacted by forming a Void Saber to defend himself. Zapper laughed and muttered that thanks to Yuki, he had woken up in the best possible situation. Without hesitation, he broke free and fled, while the execution squad immediately chased after him. Ice lances, reverse slashes, and even the demonic axe gvag were launched one after another. But Zapper defended himself by creating multiple layers of ice barriers. At the same time, another member of the execution squad intercepted Yuki, causing the entire situation to spiral even further out of control. Yuki shouted that this was not the time for them to be fighting each other. Surrounded on all sides, Zapper unleashed Thunderburst and electrocuted everyone nearby. Squad members collapsed one after another. He even kicked one of the unconscious members into a still conscious ally, forcing the man to take the hit directly. That ally immediately activated the skill and Scathed Reward to heal his comrade. While everyone was distracted, Zapper warned them not to take another step forward before grabbing Now and taking her hostage. He declared that he was no longer the same as before and that they should understand the difference between them now. At that distance, Yuki realized the shield would never reach in time, and he also wouldn't be able to cancel the spell quickly enough with arrows or sword attacks. Dugo clicked his tongue in frustration. Fed up with Zapper's cowardly tactics, he decided to handle things personally and ordered 2 guards to keep their eyes locked on Yuki. Yuki also knew he couldn't attack recklessly while a hostage was involved. If the execution squad coordinated properly, they still had a chance to resolve the situation. But Zapper only sneered and claimed it would be easier to kill everyone instead. To him, protecting people was nothing but a nuisance. As countless complicated magic circles began forming around the battlefield, Yuki immediately realized Zapper was preparing a large-scale spell. At that rate, there was no way he could protect everyone. He warned the squad members to hide behind the shadow of his magic. But before anything could happen, a silver-haired woman suddenly appeared and calmly stated that there was no need for that. She activated her skill, Eye of Fair Play, before asking Zapper if that was truly all the mana he had left. Yuki instantly recognized her. She was the captain of the execution squad and an S-rank adventurer known as the guild's living rulebook, Aina Ginki, an S-rank paladin. Without hesitation, she activated Sparrow Bee Dragon. The attack struck Zapper instantly, forcing him to lose his grip on Now. It was a terrifying technique that produced the result of a hit before the attack itself had even fully occurred. Calmly, Ginki scolded him for wasting all of his mana on offense alone. Zapper clearly hadn't expected Ginki to appear there. Panicking, he immediately cast Stonebind. At the same moment, Ginki ordered Yuki to use his magic. Yuki was shocked that she already knew about his abilities, but there was no time to think about it. He immediately summoned his Void Saber, while Zapper desperately layered multiple elemental barriers around himself. Then Zapper unleashed Ramataki Arrow Rain, covering the sky with countless arrows. The moment the attack appeared, Ginki instantly realized what he was planning. Zapper's true goal was revealed immediately. The countless arrows filling the sky weren't aimed at Ginki, but at every single member of the execution squad. Realizing it instantly, Ginki activated Scatter Arrow Divert, a skill capable of changing the destination of incoming attacks. In a single moment, The rain of arrows shifted course toward Yuki instead. Without hesitation, Yuki raised his void shield. The barrage crashed against the barrier non-stop, but every magical arrow was erased on contact. Genki calmly watched the scene, fully aware he would be able to block it. Even so, she found herself becoming increasingly curious about the monster Tamer and the strange anti-magic he wielded. While Yuki defended the squad, Genki silently moved behind Zapper. Before he could react, she swung her weapon and activated Great Neonata. The attack landed directly, overwhelming him completely. It was checkmate. The execution squad immediately rushed forward and restrained Zapper before he could escape again. Genki commented that his mana reserves were far lower than expected, which meant he had likely just finished an extremely intense battle before arriving there. After the situation was secured, she thanked Yuki for cooperating with them. His magic had allowed the battle to end far faster than anticipated. Curious, Yuki asked how she knew about his abilities in the first place. Genki explained that her Eye of Fair Play skill allowed her to inspect people's statuses directly. According to her, it functioned similarly to Yuki's Demon Eye of Truth. That explanation immediately clarified how she knew both about his anti-magic and the amount of mana Zapper had left. Soon after, Dugo reported that Zapper had been fully restrained and that all injured squad members had already received treatment. He then turned his attention toward Yuki. Genki officially stated that the suspicions surrounding him had been cleared and that he had even assisted in capturing the criminal. Dugo admitted the accusations were most likely based on misunderstandings from other adventurers. Although the investigation wasn't completely finished, Yuki would be removed from the detention list. He thanked the young adventurer for cooperating and protecting the squad during the incident. Yuki accepted it calmly, saying he was simply glad the misunderstanding had been resolved. He even offered to help with the investigation into Zapper, if necessary. However, Dugo immediately raised another problem. The dungeon Yuki had exited was an S-rank dungeon, and solo entry into such a location was strictly prohibited. Yuki froze at the reminder. Entering high-rank dungeons required direct guild approval. While he had once entered with a party after proper evaluation, diving into one alone was a major violation. Genki argued that Yuki's actual combat ability clearly wasn't the issue, but Dugo countered that her opinion alone couldn't override official guild regulations. On paper, Yuki was still merely an E-rank adventurer. Genki then proposed a solution. Yuki would officially conquer the dungeon currently under the execution squad's supervision. Dugo himself would accompany him as the acting supervisor. If the squad judged his abilities sufficient afterward, there would be no need for detention or further investigation. Yuki was shocked that someone would suggest such unusual treatment for him. Genki calmly explained that humanity's greatest sin was stagnation in dungeon conquest. According to her, that was precisely why she became captain of the execution squad in the first place. She wanted the authority to force through decisions others hesitated to make. Looking directly at him, she admitted she was interested in seeing how this monster Tamer conquered dungeons. Even so, Yuki hesitated. Showing his methods openly to outsiders carried enormous risks. Back inside Libel's dungeon, Libel advised him to proceed normally. The Demon King warned that the execution squad would monitor him closely, and if intelligent monsters capable of conversation were exposed, Yuki could lose his adventurer status entirely. Using the bat alone was also risky because the constant blood loss would leave him severely weakened from anemia. Libel doubted he could clear the dungeon relying only on that strategy. Instead, he suggested Yuki seek help from Task. Yuki remembered serving Task before and wondered whether he was another specialist like Machinami. Libel responded with a smile and explained that Task was something far beyond a mere specialist. Task was the master of his dungeon floor. More than that, he was the aggregate of every dungeon within Libel's domain. Inside a room within Libel's dungeon, Yuki finally met Task after training under Vint and Machina. Task immediately became excited, saying it was finally his turn next. Yuki explained that he wanted help from someone who truly understood monsters. Task instantly got overly friendly, grabbing Yuki by the shoulders and rubbing his face against him while saying they felt like kindred spirits. Yuki could only stand there awkwardly as Task happily mentioned that although they had seen each other during Vint's tea parties, this was their first proper conversation. Lifting Yuki onto his shoulder like a child, Task introduced himself as Task Wild and explained that researching monsters was basically his nature. Yuki could only sweat nervously, thinking he had never even met a human this intense during a first meeting. Task promised to teach him anything he wanted and pointed out that humans barely understood monsters at all. Yuki replied, "The humans simply saw monsters as creatures living inside dungeons." Task explained that monsters were actually beings that sought mana, and everything connected through mana was considered a monster. That explanation shocked Yuki. Thinking back on his experiences, he questioned whether humans could also be considered monsters. Task casually confirmed it, explaining that humans gain mana by diving into dungeons, so becoming a monster was technically more accurate. Hearing that left Yuki speechless as he recalled his maids. He eventually dropped to the ground in depression, admitting it felt strangely unsettling. Meanwhile, Task became even more excited, loudly insisting that they were basically the same type of existence. Curious now, Yuki asked whether monsters felt kinship toward members of their own race. After thinking for a moment, Task explained that monsters cared more about sharing the same mana source than appearance or race. Monsters from the same dungeon naturally treated each other as companions, while monsters from different dungeons were considered completely separate beings, even if they belonged to the same species. Yuki quickly realized that monsters valued affiliation over species. That explained why the monsters inside Libel's dungeon got along despite their different races, and why they could fight members of their own race without hesitation. Excited again, Task realized Yuki was searching for a monster capable of clearing dungeons alongside him, preferably one that stayed calm and did not talk much. Yuki explained that he also needed a monster that could handle all kinds of situations since his current level only allowed him to summon one contracted monster at a time. Task confidently declared that he had the perfect option. Moments later, a massive purple dragon appeared behind him and released a terrifying roar. Task introduced it as Tyrant Dragon, the guardian dragon of the dungeon's first floor, explaining that it possessed overwhelming vitality and destructive firepower strong enough to qualify as a boss monster in most dungeons. Before the explanation even finished, the dragon fired flames directly at Yuki. Forced to run for his life, Yuki shouted in confusion about why it was attacking him immediately. Task casually explained that although the dragon appreciated being revived, it still remembered Yuki killing it before and remained angry about it. Realizing it was the same dragon from before, Yuki stopped running and prepared to fight back instead of hiding. Surprisingly, the dragon suddenly lost interest and decided not to continue fighting after seeing him survive its flame breath unharmed. Rather than feeling relieved, Yuki became depressed after realizing the dragon did not even consider him worthy of a serious fight. He admitted that even if he managed to contract it, he lacked the mana necessary to summon such a monster anyway. Task immediately switched to another option and summoned Shadow Claw, a four-legged monster made entirely from shadow with dark and wind attributes. It possessed a stealth ability that allowed it to move through shadows. Yuki became excited after seeing a monster he had never encountered before. As he cautiously approached it, he remembered that monster contracts required either mutual agreement or recognition earned through combat. However, before he could do anything, Shadow Claw melted into the shadows and disappeared. Frustrated, Yuki demanded to know why none of the monsters would face him properly. Task casually explained that Yuki was already considered one of them, so the monsters had no reason to fight him like they would fight humans. On top of that, his mana was so low that instinctive monsters did not even see him as threatening. That explanation only made Yuki more depressed after realizing the monsters were looking down on him. Task explained that intelligent monsters respected him because he was Vint and Machina's student, but instinct-driven creatures only cared about strength. As Yuki continued feeling discouraged, Task revealed that he himself was a chimera, a composite beast made from countless monsters. Thanks to his skill, Encyclopedia of Beasts, he could freely alter his own composition and perfectly transform into other creatures. To demonstrate, Task instantly transformed into Shadow Claw itself, perfectly recreating both its abilities and appearance before changing forms again. He explained that while he could help Yuki this much, earning the monster's respect would ultimately depend on Yuki himself. Yuki activated his skill and accepted the challenge. The transformed creature immediately attacked him from the shadows, forcing Yuki to quickly draw his sword and defend himself. Realizing once again how dangerous an S-rank dungeon truly was, Yuki prepared himself for the next monster. Task summoned Eye's Owl, a darkness creature capable of using lightning magic. The owl instantly attacked while flying at overwhelming speed. Yuki activated Void Saber, realizing his attacks would never land normally because the owl was too fast. Understanding it would become a battle of endurance, he focused on waiting for the perfect opening. He managed to block one of its attacks with his sword, though the impact shocked him when something shattered during the clash. The owl immediately tried escaping again, irritating Yuki enough to chase after it, while swearing he would catch it no matter what. Task then summoned Dynamic Cancer, a giant green crab with fortress-level defense and claws powerful enough to crush through guards. Yuki attacked immediately, but the crab burrowed underground instead. Remembering his previous battles against heavily armored enemies, Yuki prepared himself and activated Blood Blossom, Beautiful Blade, my style, deciding to strike the moment the creature resurfaced. Finally, Task summoned Antinomy Snake, a white-winged serpent capable of spreading poisonous vapor through the air. The moment Yuki realized the poison did not even require a bite, he collapsed face first onto the ground. As Task casually explained the monster's terrifying abilities, Yuki desperately summoned Elvina for help. After appearing, Elvina immediately noticed his corpse-like complexion and jokingly questioned whether it was some kind of undead joke. In complete desperation, Yuki simply begged her to help him. The scene later returned to the original room, where Task explained that this was all he could show for now because the deeper floors were still too dangerous for Yuki. Completely exhausted, Yuki admitted he had nearly died several times already, though he had at least managed to contract a few monsters. Task praised him, saying that surviving even a few monsters from Libel's dungeon was already impressive. As thanks, he asked Yuki to someday introduce him to monsters from other dungeons. Confused, Yuki asked whether he meant monsters from completely different dungeons. Task happily confirmed it, explaining that even obtaining their materials would help him better understand what he truly was. Someday, he wanted to unravel every monster mixed inside himself, which was also why he had high expectations for Yuki from start. Yuki finally understood why Task had been so eager to help him. Task then asked him to bring monsters back alive if possible, though Yuki admitted that was an incredibly difficult request. As Yuki reflected on the monsters he had encountered, he realized that although the contracted monsters were powerful, none of them fully matched the all-rounder role he needed. Seeing him thinking too seriously, Task jokingly told him not to overthink it. Before Task could continue, Yuki suddenly became serious and revealed that there was actually something he wanted to try, asking Task to hear him out. Later, at the guild's law enforcement headquarters, Dugo explained the details of Yuki's next mission. The dungeon had 4 floors and was ranked B class, but what made it unusual was how drastically the terrain and monsters changed between floors. The final boss was a giant spider-type monster known as Mother Spider. Yuki was given 1 week to complete the dungeon entirely solo, while Dugo would only supervise and would not assist under any circumstances. As the two walked toward the dungeon, Dugo asked if Yuki had any questions. Yuki calmly replied that he was already prepared and continued forward without hesitation. Watching him from behind, Dugo noticed Yuki's light equipment and wondered if he was treating the mission like a scouting run. Even so, he admitted to himself that the captain must truly trust Yuki's abilities if she believed he could clear a B-rank dungeon alone within a week. An hour later, they reached the end of the first floor, a cave area. Yuki observed that the next floor was a jungle and noted how disconnected each level felt from the previous one, exactly as the reports described. While Dugo looked over the remains of defeated monsters nearby, he realized Yuki had already progressed surprisingly far without even using summons. It became clear to him that Yuki was not a monster tamer who relied purely on brute force from his creatures. Suddenly, several arrows flew out from the jungle toward Yuki. He barely managed to dodge them before a group of demon apes rushed out laughing wildly. Yuki immediately recognized them as pack monsters while they quickly surrounded him from all directions. Frustrated by how they constantly disappeared in and out of sight, Yuki finally activated his summoning skill. Dugo immediately focused on him, curious to finally see what kind of contracted monster Yuki possessed. Yuki summoned Shadow Claw. The monster appeared beside him with a hiss before instantly leaping into the shadows and slaughtering the demon apes one after another. Blood scattered everywhere as the creatures screamed in pain. Watching the massacre, Yuki calmly pointed out that hiding in the shadows meant nothing against a creature that thrived within them. Standing behind him, Dugo was shocked. Shadow Claw was a monster rarely seen outside top-tier dungeons, and the fact that Yuki had contracted something so powerful proved he was far from an ordinary adventurer. Once the area was secured, Yuki calmly announced they were moving forward. Dugo silently watched him and reflected on how dungeons were never meant to be cleared alone. Adventurers formed parties for that exact reason, and conquering one solo was normally the mark of a true hero, like the captain herself. After some time, they arrived at the third floor, an enormous ocean area. Dugo began explaining the dangers of the floor when a giant squid monster suddenly attacked Yuki and forced him backward. Watching carefully, Dugo realized Shadow Claw could not move through shadows on water. Curious about Yuki's next move, he observed him immediately unsummon Shadow Claw in order to conserve mana. Then Yuki summoned another monster. The same giant crab creature from Libel's dungeon appeared behind him, shocking Dugo once again. Yuki's monster tamer level was clearly far beyond normal standards if he could summon multiple top-tier monsters. Yuki ordered Dynamic Cancer to attack. At that moment, he remembered his earlier conversation with Task inside Libel's dungeon laboratory. During that discussion, Yuki had theorized that if Task transformed into another monster using Encyclopedia of Beasts, the summoning cost might drop because the system would still recognize him as the same individual. Since Yuki's mana was too low to summon Task's true form, he wondered whether summoning Task while transformed could bypass that restriction. If it worked, Task could effectively become an all-purpose monster capable of accessing countless forms. Task admitted he had never tested something like that before, but he agreed it was worth trying. Yuki then proposed forming a contract with him, promising to show him monsters from other dungeons in return. Task happily accepted, amused by how naturally Yuki charmed monsters. Back in the present fight, Yuki mentally told Task he was counting on him. Task, now in crab form, excitedly commented on how fascinating it was to study the squid's biology in the field. Yuki quickly warned him not to lose control of his transformation since his summoned state depended entirely on maintaining it. Yuki then identified the squid's weak point and ordered the attack. Task activated his crushing skill and smashed the squid apart with overwhelming force. After the monster died, Yuki climbed onto the crab's back and calmly declared the area secure before continuing onward. Watching from behind, Dugo could only stare at the overwhelming power Yuki commanded. The scene later shifted to the fifth floor, a corridor filled with magical laser traps. Yuki quickly recognized the danger and summoned Task in his Eyes Owl form. Task flew ahead at high speed and froze the magic circles with ice, while Yuki activated Void Shield to protect them from the remaining traps. Later, they reached the seventh floor, a poisonous swamp overflowing with monsters. Yuki carefully guided their path, avoiding unnecessary danger while maintaining a pace that rivaled, or even surpassed, a full adventurer party. Suddenly, Yuki noticed danger approaching and warned Dugo just before a snake lunged forward and bit his arm. Blood splattered from the wound as Dugo counterattacked and killed the snake with his staff. Immediately afterward, Yuki summoned Antinomy Snake. The creature flew toward Dugo and used its poison to neutralize the venom in his body, healing the wound. Dugo stared at the monster in shock, realizing it possessed healing capabilities. As Yuki explained how its poison could neutralize other toxins, Dugo fell silent. He knew he was supposed to be only a supervisor, not part of Yuki's party, and if he died it would have been his own responsibility. Yet Yuki had still protected him without hesitation. That realization deeply affected Dugo. Thinking about how many adventurers had forgotten what it truly meant to protect others, he suddenly burst into tears. Yuki was completely caught off guard and demanded to know what was suddenly so funny. Removing his mask, Dugo admitted that compared to the captain, his own judgment had clearly been lacking. With a bright smile, Dugo openly praised Yuki as an incredible adventurer and declared that they would definitely clear the dungeon within a week. Yuki awkwardly admitted that he had actually planned to finish it in a single day. Dugo froze in disbelief. He had assumed Yuki's light equipment meant this was merely a scouting run, but Yuki calmly explained that he intended to complete the entire dungeon as a simple day trip. Dugo then explained why the guild possessed so much information on the dungeon. Reaching the final floor was not uncommon, but no one had ever defeated the boss. Even 8 A-rank members of the Purge Division had failed together. Narrowing his eyes seriously, Dugo asked whether Yuki truly believed he could clear it alone in one day. Yuki confidently replied that he had already figured out the strategy. Although Dugo admitted he did not doubt Yuki's ability anymore, he still could not understand how he had devised a strategy purely from written reports. Yuki calmly explained that he had already run a practical simulation battle against the real thing. The scene shifted as Yuki and Dugo arrived before an enormous web stretching across the dungeon. While staring at the giant spider above them, Dugo recalled Yuki's experience in practical combat. With so many contracted monsters under his control, it was obvious Yuki had fought countless battles already. Still, This boss was different from anything before. The massive puppet arachne screeched as its claws clattered loudly, then rushed forward the moment Yuki calmly prepared for the conquest with his sword in hand. Dugo immediately recognized the monster's terrifying ability. Puppet arachne used its threads to control other monsters, and within moments, several creatures descended from the webs above. Demon apes and monsters from multiple floors crawled into view, all bound by spider threads, as they surrounded Yuki from every direction. Dugo quickly realized the danger. This boss was controlling 4 monsters from different floors at the same time, something even experienced adventurer parties struggled to survive against. As the monsters charged together, Yuki instantly summoned Eye's owl and grabbed onto it to leap into the air, avoiding the assault below. But just as quickly, he unsummoned it midair. The monsters below tilted their heads upward while Dugo panicked, realizing Yuki had nowhere to escape in the sky. Then Yuki summoned Dynamic Cancer beneath him. The giant crab appeared instantly, allowing Yuki to land on its shell before it crashed down onto the battlefield and crushed the attacking monsters in a single blow. Dugo was stunned. Yuki had intentionally drawn all the monsters together before wiping them out at once. However, the puppet arachne immediately sent more controlled monsters forward. Dugo understood the real problem now. The boss could continue summoning monsters endlessly, slowly exhausting its opponents over time. Yuki calmly unsummoned Dynamic Cancer and immediately called forth Shadow Claw instead. The shadow beast appeared and instantly tore into one of the enemies. Watching the battle unfold, Yuki confirmed that everything was proceeding according to the strategy he had prepared beforehand. Earlier in Libel's dungeon, Yuki had asked Task whether he could transform into a puppet arachne. Task casually explained that he could, since they already had one within their dungeon. Realizing this gave him the opportunity to practice before entering the real dungeon. Yuki immediately suggested a mock battle. Task warned him that transformed forms only replicated the average abilities of a monster. Boss-class individuals with abnormal growth required studying their actual flesh and blood to fully copy them. Even so, Yuki decided it was enough to prepare a strategy. Moments later, Task transformed into a spider and suspended Yuki from the ceiling with webs. While analyzing the skill, Yuki discovered that puppet arachne controlled creatures through perfectly coordinated sharing. Task further explained that the monster manipulated unconscious targets, combining thread control with paralytic venom to drag prey into its nest. After freeing himself, Yuki immediately understood the weakness. Conscious creatures could not be controlled properly. Task assumed Yuki intended to use Antinomy Snake to neutralize the paralysis before attacking, but Yuki had already thought of something better. He instead asked Task to explain the monster's stats in detail. Back in the present battle, Yuki remembered what he had learned during that training. Monsters driven by instinct only acknowledged strength and could not properly follow complex commands. That was why puppet arachne needed to control them directly. As Yuki dodged attacks and cut through enemies one after another, he carefully observed the spider's thread range exactly as he had practiced earlier. Task, now transformed into Shadow Claw, informed him through communication that one of the monsters had already been eliminated according to plan. Everything finally fell into place when puppet arachne selected Crushed Tentacle as its next controlled monster and sent it toward Yuki. At that exact moment, Yuki summoned Antinomy Snake. The snake wrapped itself around him as he ordered it to neutralize the paralysis affecting Crushed Tentacle. The moment the paralysis disappeared, puppet arachne lost proper control over the powerful monster. Yuki explained the weakness directly. The spider only paralyzed its own monsters because it could not freely command stronger creatures otherwise. While weaker monsters were manageable, controlling the strongest creature in the dungeon required suppressing its instincts first. If all 4 monsters began moving freely at once, even puppet arachne would lose control completely. The plan worked perfectly. Crushed Tentacle turned against the spider itself, forcing puppet arachne into chaos. As the spider collapsed under the backlash of its own strategy, Yuki pointed out that it no longer had any way to defend itself. Even while under attack from the enraged tentacles, Yuki summoned Dynamic Cancer once more. Protected behind the crab's impenetrable shell, he closed the distance without slowing down. The spider's threads were too far away to recover in time, leaving it completely exposed. Yuki delivered a clean slash with his sword while Task, still in the crab form, crushed the squid monster apart with its claws. Moments later, the battle ended completely as Yuki calmly declared the conquest complete. Watching everything from a distance, Dugo finally understood the true extent of Yuki's ability. He was not only controlling his own monsters perfectly, but also manipulating enemy monsters and the battlefield itself as though everything rested in the palm of his hand. After the fight, Yuki hurried over and asked if this was enough to gain approval. Dugo paused briefly before sincerely telling him to raise his rank as quickly as possible. At first, Yuki misunderstood, thinking he still lacked something, but Dugo clarified that the opposite was true. Yuki already possessed enough strength to conquer many more dungeons, and leaving him at a low rank would simply be a waste. Hearing this, Yuki immediately realized it meant he would finally be allowed to perform solo conquests officially. Dugo confirmed it, then revealed his next plan. Since Yuki had no other conquest scheduled for the week, Dugo intended to personally select the most efficient dungeons for rapid rank promotion over the remaining 6 days. Tas became excited at the thought of visiting multiple dungeons and encountering new monsters, while Yuki quietly realized his own conquest methods had only created even more work for himself. 6 exhausting days later, Yuki found himself entering his final dungeon for the promotion exam, while Dugo practically dragged his exhausted body through the corridor. Yuki admitted to himself that the non-stop dungeon runs had been just as brutal as he expected. At the entrance, Dugo handed him another document and explained that this mission was different. This time it was not a conquest mission, but a joint investigation quest. Confused, Yuki asked what kind of target required such a mission. Dugo then revealed the answer. They would be investigating a hyper-special individual that had surpassed normal racial limits, a being known as a named one. While moving through the forest dungeon with Dugo, Yuki asked about the term named ones, admitting he had never heard of it before. Dugo explained that it was a technical classification and revealed that Carrot, the monster Yuki defeated earlier, had also been considered a named one. That immediately reminded Yuki of the terrifying monster from before. Dugo continued explaining that monsters normally had stats and abilities that stayed within a predictable range depending on their species. Individual differences existed, but occasionally a monster would appear that completely surpassed those natural limits. These special monsters possessed abnormal stats or unique abilities far beyond what adventurers had previously observed. Because of that, adventurers began identifying them with special nicknames, and such monsters eventually became known as named ones. As Yuki listened, he recalled Task's earlier explanation that certain skills could not be copied because they originated from personal mastery rather than species traits. Manga had once taught him that there were 3 types of skills: those gained from jobs, those tied to species, and those unique to individuals. In that sense, Yuki realized he himself resembled a named one, since Encyclopedia of Beasts was an ability unique only to him. Back in the present, Yuki seriously asked whether named ones could potentially reach the level of demon kings. Dugo calmly admitted that such cases were not unheard of, which was exactly why investigation missions like this were necessary to determine their threat level. As they continued deeper into the dungeon, Dugo explained that investigations required cooperation with other adventurers, so they should establish good relations before proceeding further. However, the moment they approached the gathering area, Yuki immediately noticed the awkward atmosphere around them. Several adventurers whispered among themselves while staring at Yuki from a distance. Some discussed the rumors about the monster tamer who had recently been clearing dungeon after dungeon alone, even conquering high-ranked dungeons with contracted monsters rarely seen outside top-tier areas. Others had already started referring to him with a strange title, Human-Shaped Dungeon. Another adventurer noticed Dugo's white uniform and realized he belonged to the Purge Division. The surrounding adventurers immediately became nervous, assuming they were being monitored despite doing nothing wrong. Watching everyone avoid them entirely, Yuki dryly pointed out that Dugo seemed just as feared as he was. Dugo scratched his head awkwardly and explained that his job mainly involved maintaining order among adventurers. Before the conversation could continue, Yuki suddenly sensed danger and gripped his sword. At that exact moment, a camouflaged root shot out from the ground and grabbed a blonde adventurer by the leg, lifting her into the air. Nearby adventurers panicked as hidden tree monsters revealed themselves and moved in to attack. Before the monsters could strike, Shadow Claw appeared beside Yuki and instantly shredded the enemies apart with its claws. Dugo quickly healed the injured girl, using his skill, while Yuki continued cutting through the remaining tree monsters one after another. After stabilizing the situation, Yuki instructed the adventurers to support him while he used his abilities to detect hidden enemies and guide the group safely forward. Encouraged by his leadership, the others immediately followed his directions. Once the monsters were cleared out, Yuki commented on how unusually crowded the dungeon was with enemies. Dugo explained that although the dungeon was only C rank, its poor accessibility and easily replaceable materials caused most adventurers to abandon it. Only a small number of adventurers ever bothered clearing such places unless some major problem appeared. While listening, Yuki quietly decided he would clear the dungeon himself once the investigation ended. Suddenly, Yuki sensed the investigation target nearby and stopped everyone immediately. Ahead of them sat a small blue-white carbuncle resting calmly on a tree stump. The blonde adventurer was instantly charmed by its appearance, but Yuki immediately recognized it as a highly intelligent monster famous for escaping danger. Using his skill, Yuki confirmed that the creature possessed an unusual ability, proving it was indeed the investigation target. However, before he could explain further, a reckless red-haired adventurer rushed toward the carbuncle in an attempt to defeat it quickly. Yuki immediately tried to stop him, warning that attacking carelessly was dangerous. Startled by the humans, the carbuncle panicked and activated its skill. Instantly, the dungeon around them began restructuring itself into a massive labyrinth. Walls erupted everywhere, separating the adventurers from one another and completely changing the surrounding terrain. Watching the dungeon transform, Dugo realized the reports had been accurate. The carbuncle possessed a terrifying skill capable of reconstructing the dungeon itself. Its title was Fairy Tale, the Lost Tale. Elsewhere inside the newly formed labyrinth, falling rocks and collapsing terrain forced separated adventurers into desperate situations. The carbuncle continued using its skill repeatedly while fleeing deeper into the dungeon. Suddenly, the ground beneath two adventurers gave way completely, dropping them to a lower floor. Seeing this happen, Yuki immediately informed Dugo that he was going after them. Dugo agreed and decided to search for the remaining adventurers before reporting the situation outside. Before separating, he handed Yuki an emergency escape device in case things became dangerous. Yuki immediately jumped down after the fallen adventurers. After landing safely below, he began calling out for them while searching the dark area. But before he could continue, his senses detected an overwhelming presence nearby. The two adventurers stood frozen in fear before a massive tree-like monster radiating dark mana. The enormous creature towered over them while calmly counting the humans standing before it. Resting safely within its giant hand was the carbuncle from earlier. The monster reassured the frightened carbuncle that it would eliminate the intruders immediately. Trembling with relief, the carbuncle thanked the creature and addressed it as Lord Zeres. The moment Yuki sensed the monster's mana, he immediately understood the situation. There was no doubt about it. This creature was the dungeon boss itself. Yet somehow it had appeared on such a shallow floor, something that should never happen normally. Meanwhile, Zeres gently held the carbuncle and instructed it to continue assisting him with its labyrinth skill. Inside the forest dungeon, the massive monster lowered its body and declared that the intruders would pay for entering its territory. It immediately activated a powerful root-based skill, causing enormous tree roots to burst toward the adventurers from underground. Realizing the danger instantly, Yuki summoned Dynamic Cancer to shield everyone. The giant crab blocked the attack, but even Task admitted through mind communication that the damage was overwhelming and that the shell would not endure repeated attacks for long. Yuki quickly ordered the two adventurers to stay behind him and tossed them the escape device Dugo had given him. As Yuki observed the enemy, he realized something was wrong. Even with Evil Eye, he could not properly read the monster's skill, proving the opponent was far stronger than the investigation report suggested. The monster then attacked again, swinging its enormous palm while combining it with underground root assaults. Yuki warned everyone to watch beneath their feet, explaining that the roots attacked from below and could be avoided if they reacted quickly enough. However, before they could move properly, the carbuncle activated its labyrinth skill and instantly trapped them inside a stone dome. The monster immediately combined its own skill with the labyrinth, causing giant stone pillars to erupt inside the prison and crush everything within. Believing the battle finished, the monster comforted the frightened carbuncle and explained that as long as it stayed nearby, the dungeon floors could continue expanding endlessly. But moments later, cracks spread across the stone prison. Task, in owl form, burst out and launched an ice attack at the monster. Although the attack landed directly, the monster barely reacted. Soon after, Yuki also emerged from the ruined dome and calmly stated that surprise attacks alone would not be enough. The monster was shocked that Yuki had survived and questioned what had happened to the other two adventurers. Yuki avoided giving a direct answer, though internally he admitted he had barely managed to use his sword technique in time to send the others back safely. Since he could no longer summon Q-chan afterward, he knew he would not be able to use the technique again. With no other choice left, Yuki prepared himself to defeat the monster directly. The enemy, irritated by Yuki's persistence, ordered Carbuncle to activate the labyrinth again. This time, massive dome-like structures began falling from above, while the monster launched additional piercing attacks at the same time. Yuki barely avoided the attacks, while complaining that the combination was unfairly overwhelming. The monster continued the relentless assault, believing Yuki would eventually collapse from exhaustion. Task attempted to assist with magic support, but Yuki dismissed the owl summon instead, deciding there was a better approach. As the monster unleashed another barrage, Yuki declared that he would stop defending and switch entirely to offense. He then summoned an undead maid through flames. The maid immediately smashed apart one of the falling spike domes with raw strength before casually complaining about having to wear a maid outfit. Yuki remembered that undead maids possess bodies without fatigue, as well as incredible physical strength. Taking advantage of that power, the maid lifted several of the giant spike domes at once and hurled them back toward the enemy. The monster was caught completely off guard and heavily damaged by its own attack. After landing, the maid jokingly pointed out that transforming into this form earlier would have solved the situation much faster. Yuki explained that he could not reveal certain summons in front of other adventurers and also noted that, unlike Elvina, Task could not use full chant magic in every form. The maid reminded him of her abilities, causing Yuki to realize he had overlooked an important option until the last moment. With the situation finally turning in their favor, Yuki prepared for the next phase of the fight. Meanwhile, the injured monster struggled to stand while Carbuncle desperately suggested retreating. The monster refused completely and insisted on continuing the battle, even if it meant pushing the dungeon beyond its limits. Carbuncle warned that forcing further dungeon reconstruction would severely damage the monster's body, but the enraged creature no longer cared. It declared that even a dungeon collapse would be acceptable if it meant killing Yuki and attracting everyone to the area. The moment Yuki heard the words dungeon collapse, he immediately realized how dangerous the situation had become. The explanation about dungeon collapse revealed the terrifying history behind it. The very first country to discover dungeons had once stood at the top of the world, but it was also the first place where dungeon collapses were observed. Soon after the initial incident, collapses began occurring one after another across the nation, and within only a few hours, the entire country disappeared from the map. Because of that tragedy, the profession of adventurers was created to prevent similar disasters, while the guild was established to support them. Even so, dungeon collapses still continued to threaten the world in the present day. Back in the battle, Yuki clenched his teeth after realizing the seriousness of the situation. Carbuncle desperately begged Zeras to reconsider using further dungeon reconstruction, explaining that the repeated strain was damaging his body and could eventually cause him to lose control of the dungeon itself. Zeras lowered his body to listen, but instead of accepting the warning, he became furious. Grabbing Carbuncle tightly, he accused the rabbit of doubting his strength against a mere human. He admitted that Carbuncle's rare skill had been useful and could even have helped him evolve into something comparable to a demon king, but he no longer needed the rabbit alive. Before Carbuncle could react, Zeras activated a skill that caused roots to pierce through the rabbit's body. Yuki watched in shock as Zeras absorbed Carbuncle directly into himself, assimilating both its body and its abilities. Once the process was complete, Zeras immediately hijacked the labyrinth skill for himself and launched another massive attack. Task rushed forward to block the incoming debris while Zeras combined the labyrinth ability with his piercing root attacks. Even after being impaled through the stomach, Task casually noted that the wounds barely mattered because of the undead body. Yuki apologized for relying on Task again and used the opening to move in for a direct strike. Task quickly agreed, genuinely alarmed by how dangerous the dungeon had become. Enraged that Yuki continued avoiding every attack, Zeras repeatedly activated the labyrinth skill and shattered the terrain beneath them. The ground split apart violently, causing Yuki to lose his footing. He immediately unsummoned the undead maid and summoned Wise Owl instead, using it to maneuver through the collapsing battlefield while dodging countless attacks. But Zeras escalated things even further. Activating another skill, he caused a massive earthquake before completely destroying the upper floors of the dungeon. Wise Owl was horrified, realizing Zeras had gone completely out of control. At the same time, enormous rock-like roots wrapped in tree veins emerged from Zeras' body and launched toward Yuki. Hanging in midair while holding onto Wise Owl, Yuki realized he had nowhere left to escape. Just before the attack connected, Dugo suddenly appeared and reached out toward him. Moments later, the attack crashed down, but when the dust settled, both Yuki and Dugo had vanished. The two reappeared elsewhere inside the dungeon. Sitting on the desert-like ground and catching his breath, Yuki admitted how close the situation had been. Dugo explained that after returning earlier, he learned only the two adventurers had escaped safely, so he immediately rushed back into the dungeon alone. Shortly afterward, the floor itself collapsed, but he somehow managed to survive. Yuki quickly shifted the conversation to the far more important issue, explaining that they were now facing a genuine dungeon collapse crisis. Hearing that, Dugo was visibly shocked. Although he wanted to respond immediately, Dugo explained that dungeon collapses were still poorly understood. The only confirmed information was that actively cleared dungeons were less likely to collapse. Once the process fully began, both the dungeon and surrounding regions would collapse together, leaving behind no witnesses. Yuki recalled the chaotic state of the dungeon and admitted he could not dismiss the threat as a bluff. Dugo agreed completely, but the situation was complicated because all S-rank adventurers were currently occupied fighting Demon King-class dungeon bosses. Most upper-rank adventurers had also been dispatched elsewhere, meaning gathering reinforcements would take time. Yuki suggested clearing the dungeon immediately with whatever adventurers were available, but Dugo pointed out that most adventurers work primarily for money and would not willingly risk themselves against an unknown disaster. He reminded Yuki that people willing to act selflessly like him were extremely rare. After asking what they should do next, Yuki listened as Dugo decided they should first report the crisis to the guild and issue evacuation orders to nearby regions. Dugo himself planned to head toward the dungeon where the captain was fighting, hoping communication devices would still function there. Before leaving, Dugo warned Yuki not to attempt something reckless like clearing the collapsing dungeon alone. Even with Yuki's strength, nobody knew whether the collapse could actually be stopped. Yuki outwardly agreed and walked away, but internally he had already decided otherwise. Sometime later, Yuki arrived at Libel's dungeon and headed straight toward the throne room. Although he acknowledged that charging into the dungeon immediately would be reckless, he realized there might still be another path forward. Humans treated dungeon collapse as a mysterious disaster with unknown causes, but both Zeras and Task had spoken as if monsters clearly understood the mechanisms behind it. That realization convinced Yuki there was only one thing left to do. Standing before the throne, Yuki decided he would learn directly from the monsters themselves about dungeon collapses, dungeon mechanisms, and the true nature of monsters. Meanwhile, Libel sat upon the throne, visibly confused by Yuki's sudden request. Sitting calmly on the throne, Libel listened to Yuki's request and admitted that if Yuki had been an ordinary human, he would have refused to explain anything. However, considering the current situation, Libel decided to tell him the truth, mainly because it would be troublesome if Yuki recklessly entered a dungeon on the verge of collapse. When Yuki directly asked why dungeon collapse happened, Libel explained that although the causes leading up to it could vary, the final trigger was always the same: the dungeon boss losing control of the dungeon itself. Yuki was confused by the explanation, but Libel calmly continued. He revealed that dungeons were spaces that should not naturally exist in the world, and maintaining them required an enormous amount of mana. To protect the monsters living inside, dungeon bosses sustained these spaces by sacrificing their own life force. Because of that burden, bosses constantly searched for methods to maintain balance and survive, much like how monsters relied on humans for certain advantages. Libel then demonstrated the concept by overfilling a wine glass until it shattered in front of Yuki. He explained that some dungeon bosses eventually pushed their dungeons beyond what their own bodies could handle. Others poured in more mana than they could sustain. Once the balance collapsed, the dungeon itself broke apart along with the surrounding space, creating the disasters humans feared. Yuki realized that the destruction appearing in the outside world was simply the aftershock of that collapse. Libel confirmed this and explained that monsters survived only by carefully balancing their dungeons. In Zeras' case, repeatedly reconstructing the dungeon in a short period had already placed unbearable strain on his body. According to Libel, Zeras was destined to self-destruct eventually no matter what happened. Because of that, Libel ordered Yuki to stay out of it entirely. Yuki immediately refused. He argued that countless innocent people could become victims if the collapse continued unchecked. Libel responded that monsters face the same danger as well, and losing Yuki would place many monsters under threat too. At that moment, Libel decided to physically stop him. With a single wind attack, he blasted Yuki across the chamber and cracked the floor beneath him. A terrifying aura spread from Libel's body as he calmly stated that he would not kill Yuki, but instead wear him down until he could no longer move. Even while observing him with evil eye, Yuki could barely process the overwhelming danger signals. Libel's pressure far surpassed even the extreme training he had experienced with Manhwa. Yuki realized that a simple gesture from Libel carried absurd destructive power. Libel admitted that Yuki was not the type to give up easily, which was exactly why he intended to suppress him completely. Yuki attempted to analyze the fight while dodging repeated attacks, realizing that directly fighting Libel was hopeless. Even using void magic would not help much, because Libel already knew all of his abilities. As the battle continued, Libel casually shattered the floor with his footsteps alone, sending shockwaves throughout the chamber. Yuki was shocked by the monster's absurd physical strength and wondered what kind of status values Libel actually possessed. When Yuki questioned whether damaging his own dungeon like this was acceptable, Libel dismissed it as insignificant compared to Yuki's safety. He then admitted that Yuki had already become incredibly strong enough that Libel himself was willing to trust his own survival to him. Even so, he still believed Yuki had no chance of stopping a dungeon collapse alone. Libel firmly declared that he would not allow Yuki to walk into a battle that could only end in failure. Despite understanding all of that, Yuki refused to back down. He admitted that he could not bear the thought of arriving too late again, even if trying cost him his life. Yuki suddenly rushed forward and prepared a sword stance, making Libel believe he was planning to use a familiar sword skill combined with magic. Confident he could block it, Libel began preparing a counterspell. But at the last second, Yuki revealed his real plan and summoned Elvina instead. Using teleportation magic, Elvina instantly transported both herself and Yuki away from Libel's chamber before Libel could stop them. Watching them disappear, Libel calmly admitted he had not expected teleportation magic, though he also made it clear that escaping from a demon king would not be easy. Elsewhere inside the dungeon, Yuki collapsed onto Elvina's lap while catching his breath and thanking her for saving him. Elvina explained that when he contacted her telepathically, she assumed he needed another spell and was completely unprepared for him suddenly deciding to flee from Libel himself. She even suggested they return and apologize together. Yuki internally complained that he had not actually done anything wrong, then asked where they had been teleported. Elvina admitted she did not know every floor in the dungeon, but believed they were somewhere above Libel's chambers. Realizing they needed to find an exit quickly, Yuki prepared to move, but before they could leave, an announcement echoed throughout the dungeon. The message ordered every floor to capture adventurer Yuki alive by any means necessary. Hearing that, Elvina stared at him in disbelief and asked what exactly he had done this time. Yuki calmly accepted the situation, admitting he had always expected something like this might happen eventually. With his resolve completely set, Yuki declared that if Libel intended to stop him through force, then he would fight against the entire dungeon itself.